Hey, happy Tuesday. That is to say that today is Tuesday and the date is 2/22/22. That's crazy. Anyway, welcome to another Theological Dust Up hosted by Free Thinking Ministries. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton, and as many of you know, I just had my first official debate a few days ago against one of the most prolific debaters on the planet, Dr. James White. Now, White has been debating for over the past 30 years, and I've heard he's got somewhere between 200 and 300 debates under his belt. I think people have lost track. Needless to say, I was scared to death, but confident to go against this debate giant. Now, I believed, and I still do, that the truth was on my side. Be that as it may, I was told by several people before the debate, as if I didn't already know this, that I was a big underdog for at least three reasons. Number one, the wording of the resolution, I guess, wasn't in my favor. I had the obligation of shouldering the burden of proof, which I believe I did, but all White had to do is sit back and take pot shots, or so he thought. Second, as I said, Dr. White has been debating for over 3 decades, and this was my first, so White had all the experience in his favor. That was intimidating. And three, finally, I only had one 8-minute rebuttal period before we went to the 40 minutes of cross-examination. So that left me with 2 speeches, but only being able to offer one, responding to anything that Dr. White said before we went into the cross-examination, or the cross-ex, as the cool kids say. Now, White, on the other hand, had 2 opportunities, if he chose to use them or not, to respond to both my opener and my one and only rebuttal before going into the 40 minutes of cross-ex. And it was that 40 minutes of cross-ex that really exposed my lack of experience in my rookie debut. Well, hindsight is 2020. In retrospect, as I continue to review the cross-examination portion of my debate with Dr. White, and I think I've watched it every day since the debate. Look, I would do things much differently. I'm kind of embarrassed of how I looked and sounded. I've already learned so much from the mistakes I made during that part of the debate. With that said, I am quite pleased with, I think, every other aspect of the debate, from my opening case to my closing comments. I felt as if I made a strong case in my opening statement that was never refuted. But my style, or lack thereof, and the CX, or the cross-X, may have offered a glaring distraction from the content, the substance, and the arguments that I offered, demonstrating that Molinism is biblical. Well, today I'm joined by a neutral reviewer who thinks that both James White and Tim Stratton are wrong. My guest and I are going to focus on the cross-examination, and we're going to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. So without further ado, please welcome Danny Shaw to the show. Let's see. Add to stream. There you are. How you doing, Danny?
Just fine. Thanks for having me on.
Danny, tell the crowd a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. I'm getting my master's degree. It should be this year in December. I also teach high school. I teach science and philosophy and an introductory level here. I have a little small YouTube channel, and a part of what got me into philosophy is thinking about this kind of stuff: free will, God, divine foreknowledge, Christianity, and philosophy of religion. It's an excellent, I'll call it a gateway drug to the crazier things that happen in philosophy. And it's really deep stuff, intellectually fulfilling. And so that's one of the reasons why I actually looked into this debate a bit. And I'm really excited to be on here with you to discuss it.
Well, that's awesome. Look, if you're watching this video, I want to highly encourage you to check out Danny's YouTube show. I've actually been on his show in the past, and I thought he treated me fairly back then. I don't, it's not like we're great friends or anything, but he's had me on his show. I felt like he was respectful and really tried to understand me. I've watched some of his other interviews, and have felt like he's always fair and balanced, even if he disagrees. And then I saw Danny review the cross-examination portion of my debate with Dr. White. And Danny didn't pull any punches, but he was fair. And I thought, wow, where he's critical of me, I agree with him and I want to learn from him. Danny's got a lot of experience and has been trained in debate. He knows what makes a debate a good debate, and what to do and what not to do. And all of his criticisms against me, I thought, were pretty good. And he even had some criticisms for Dr. White. He also said good things about both of us. And I thought, I would love to have you on my show to kind of do the same thing. And this time I'll be able to interject every once in a while. But look, I thought it would be very interesting to do a review of this cross-ex with somebody who is completely neutral. Now I'll say this. Let me explain why I picked another reason why I picked Danny here. Because Danny's not a Christian. Now that might surprise you. You're like, wait a second. Free Thinking Ministries. This is a ministry after all. Why would you bring an atheist on your show to kind of run the interview today? And well, look, it's because every Christian, every thoughtful Christian already leans one way or the other. I mean, based upon the law of the excluded middle, ED, or exhaustive divine determinism, is true or it isn't. And this means a thoughtful Christian will either lean toward James White's view of Ed Calvinism, or they will lean toward a libertarian view, either lean that way or fully embrace it. Now, those who lean toward or embrace the libertarian view, those would be Molinists like me, Arminians, open theists, and even some Calvinists who reject Ed. And there are many. I discuss them in my book. But here's the deal. If Ed is false, because there are some instances, or even one instance, of libertarian freedom in the history of mankind, then based upon the law of the excluded middle, again, God either possesses knowledge of how these free agents would choose prior to creation, or he doesn't. Now, if he does not possess this knowledge prior to his decree and creation, then some flavor of open theism is true. If God does possess this knowledge, then, as I argue in my book, then some flavor of Molinism is true. It's what I call mere Molinism. But here's the point. For the sake of being fair and balanced, I thought it would be interesting to have a non-Christian review this debate with me. A non-Christian who's trained in philosophy. He's a grad student in philosophy, teaches philosophy, and is highly experienced in debate. He's going to be a neutral, fair and balanced reviewer talking to me about the cross-examination. Now, to be perfectly honest, Danny, I got to tell you, I'm rooting for you to become a Christian someday and become my brother in Christ. But for today's purpose, your lack of belief is actually helpful. And perhaps this is an example of why God allows there to be non-resistant non-belief. I don't know, just saying. But that's a topic for another show. So what I want to do today, Danny, is give you control of the ship from here on out. I'm giving you the reins, so to speak, and I want you to lead the discussion while asking me questions and allowing me to jump in every so often. So is that cool with you?
That's cool with me.
All
and
right,
I wanted everyone to notice that what Tim just said, he just kind of gave a little nutshell of his argument. Notice that nowhere did he say Calvinism is false. Okay. So the point is that in Dr. Stratton's argument, he presents, I guess, a more full fleshed out argument that he just presented just now. And you could hold on to a lot of Calvinistic teaching. I mean, it doesn't straightforwardly follow from what he's saying that you can't be a Calvinist. So we're not going to review his opener, although I would encourage for the viewers to see his opener and also White's response. I think that this debate is actually not as embarrassing as you would say, or you should think, Dr. Stratton, because I think that in the future people can go back and watch this debate and learn. Okay, despite our speed bumps and our mistakes on both sides or whatnot, this is a debate that nonetheless you can learn from. Okay.
Mhm.
But we're going to skip the opener and Dr. White's opener as well. But I want to point out one thing that I think stuck out in terms of criticism, and it goes to Dr. White. I think that Dr. Stratton's argument was not to show that Calvinism was overall false. Okay. It had to do with exhaustive divine determinism, showing that there are problems with that, and that Molinism can be some kind of, or I guess refuge, for lack of a better word, from the problems that plague divine determinism or exhaustive divine determinism. In Dr. White's opener, he is one of his criticisms of Dr. Stratton is that he was just attacking Calvinism, and this was not apparently true. So I wanted to point that out to begin with. I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, please. Yeah, Dr. White basically dismissed so much of what I said. As I was defending the first contention, I had a deductive argument concluding, therefore, Molinism is biblical. And then I offered 4 key contentions that if each contention was true, then it demonstrated why the argument logically followed to that conclusion. Now, to support my first key contention, I demonstrated that it was a true dichotomy, that if Ed is true, then no one has ever possessed libertarian freedom. But if anybody has ever possessed libertarian freedom, then Ed is false. So if I can attack Ed, then that is support for my first key contention. Now, I did not attack 5-point Calvinism. In fact, in the debate, I granted it for the sake of argument. I don't hold it, right? I reject 5-point Calvinism. But for the sake of argument, I granted it. So contrary to what Dr. White said, that I was just dropping bombs on Calvinism, that's false. What I was doing was attacking Ed, which is not essential to Calvinism. In fact, there's many Reformed scholars today that reject Ed. So you can be well within the Reformed boundaries and reject exhaustive divine causal determinism. But Dr. White conflates it seems, his Calvinism with Ed. So thank you, Danny, for pointing that out. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and start. So I went ahead and shared the video. But yeah, so we're skipping. I would encourage everyone to watch the beginning for some context where if I need to elucidate on the context as we're going through the cross-examination, we'll both do that. But we'll go ahead and begin.
Go first, right? So I'll go first. Okay, just as a reminder, the cross-examination, we get feedback. Maybe. Both speakers know to ask clear questions relatively, and each speaker please answer answer questions, and do not answer with a question. And I just hope to sit here and moderate that. So, no yelling and screaming, as has happened before here. So some of you may know that. Okay. Do you want me to keep time, or do you have a timer?
Yeah,
I'll keep time.
Go. You got it?
I'll keep time.
I'll do it too. Just so
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Dr. White, thank you for the exchange so far. I want to agree with you with what you've written in your book, The Forgotten Trinity. And by the way, I love that book, and I encourage people to get I've taught out of it for years now. But one thing that you say in there is you talk about the need to clearly define our terms. This is really feeding back on me. You talk about the need to really clearly define our terms, or else little else will be accomplished. So I think it's important for you and I to come to an agreement on what we mean by these different kinds of freedom that you just raised. So I'd like to start with what you described as creaturely freedom, because I want to understand that. So I propose that we use chapter 9 of your own confession of faith, the London Baptist Confession. And for the sake of the audience, I know you know it, but let me read the first 2 points of chapter 9. 1, God hath endued the will of man with that natural liberty and power of acting upon choice that is neither forced nor by any necessity of nature determined to do good or evil. And they back that up with Matthew, James, and Deuteronomy. And then point 2, man in a state of innocency had freedom and power to will and to do that which was good and well-pleasing to God, but yet was unstable so that he might fall from it, Ecclesiastes and Genesis. So before moving forward and discussing other kinds of freedom, can we at least agree right now, Dr. White, that this is a good working definition of what you refer to as creaturely freedom?
Well, unfortunately, what the confession is referring to there is pre-fall. So you.
All right. So we're going to elaborate on this confession, but as I critique both Dr. Stratton and Dr. White, I want to say this, right? Consider me a food critic, right? Food critics don't need to know how to cook, okay? So any criticism I give, I'm not saying I could have done any better, okay? It's so easy to be critical, not only of other people, but of yourself and for in hindsight. So yes, we're going to be critical here, right? And I'm not suggesting that I could do better or anything. So I just wanted to clear that up. Now, here's what I would do. That's a mouthful of a confession. Yeah. And I think that presenting the confession as you did right there is fine. But then maybe present, okay, well, what I take from that is libertarian freedom or this type of freedom, given that it affirms 1 and 2, something like that. I don't know if you wanted to speak or elaborate on this confession.
Do you want me to discuss why I think the confession is describing libertarian freedom here? Or
yeah, so the idea is that you brought up the confession. You want him to affirm it, okay? Yeah. Is there a reason why you want him to affirm it?
Yeah, because as I was studying Dr. White's material, preparing for the debate, and I was watching his videos, it seemed to me that when he was describing creaturely freedom, at least sometimes, I thought to myself, well, wow, that's exactly what I mean by libertarian freedom. It really got me intrigued. And then I recalled that he really, that he likes the London Baptist Confession. And I recalled that there was some interesting language there. So I went and reviewed that. And as I looked at those first 2 points, this is about pre-fall Adam. It really seemed to describe how, using the same words that I would use to describe libertarian freedom today. So let's recall the definitions I offered in my opening statement. I said that libertarian freedom is the ability to choose such that antecedent conditions are insufficient to causally determine or necessitate one's choice. And then by determinism, I said that determinism is the idea that antecedent conditions are causally sufficient for an effect. And this is also known as causal determinism. And then I said with Ed in mind, or exhaustive divine determinism, I said that's the idea that God determines all effects, especially all things about humanity, which would include all desires, thoughts, beliefs, actions, behaviors, evaluations, and judgments. So it's important to note that here antecedent conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. And I think that is such an important point. I offered it in my opening statement, and I continue to go back to it. But let me say that again. It's because it's an either or. Antecedent conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. If they're sufficient, then Ed is true. But if libertarian freedom is ever possessed by even pre-fall Adam, then Ed is false. The antecedent conditions were insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. So with that in mind, let's go to the LBC, chapter 9, London Baptist Confession, chapter 9, 1 and 2. So the first point says, God hath endued the will of man with that natural liberty and power of acting upon choice, that it is neither forced nor by any necessity of nature determined to do good or evil. So the word liberty is where the word libertarian comes from. And when it describes the power to choose, and that this choice is not forced. Now, let me talk about this word force here. There are many definitions of force. And I say, if it's saying it's not forced, we should consider all these definitions. But it does not say, this confession does not say anything about being forced against one's will, right? So that's where James White jump to, and that's what a lot of ed people do. They jump to, well, there was no gun to my head forcing me to do something against my will. Stop it. That's not what we're talking about. The epitome of forcing something to happen is to set up antecedent conditions that are causally sufficient to necessitate an effect. So we can talk about force in that manner, and I think it makes perfect sense to do so. So the London Baptist Confession says that it's not forced, right? And it says nothing about against one's will. So that's begging the question and jumping there and bringing up coercion. That's not what we're talking about here. And if that's not clear enough, the LBC notes that this choice is not necessitated or determined to do one thing or the other. Well, that seems to imply heavily that there's two things that are each compatible with one's nature in a specific circumstance. And that's not just libertarian freedom. That's the strong view of libertarian freedom. So I really wish I would have let Dr. White expand on this. And this really, if I was going to say I made the biggest mistake I made all night is, and we'll hear this here in a bit, he'll say, can I expand on that, or can I explain the difference? And I said, no, because I just wanted to get through my questions. Big mistake, rookie mistake. I should have said, please, Dr. White, tell us the difference between this creaturely freedom that you say that pre-fall Adam had and the libertarian freedom that I'm describing. What is the difference? And I should have spent all 20 minutes of my part of the cross-ex there on that. So bottom line, I'd still love to see how Dr. White would distinguish between that kind of freedom that pre-fall Adam possessed and the libertarian freedom I'm arguing for, it, because they seem to be the exact same thing. In fact, Dr. White and I have had some private exchanges since the debate, and I've asked him to clarify this, and he hasn't gotten around to it yet. I'll just say that. So I really want to hear him to clarify this. He's going to be on Eli Ayala's show later tonight, so I encourage people to watch that and send their questions in, get them to answer it. But anyway, I call this libertarian, or what I call libertarian freedom. It seems to me that James White calls creaturely freedom. So now let's look at the second point of the LBC, chapter 9, 2. It says, man in his state of innocency had freedom and power to will and to do that which was good and well-pleasing to God, but yet was unstable so that he might fall from it. Now that implies he had the power to do what was good, or to do, or I should say, and to do what was not good. He could fall away from the good. He might fall from it. He could fall from it is another way to say that. So this heavily implies an ability to do otherwise, these alternative possibilities. Now, some might want to say, well, Adam was just acting according to his nature. Okay, well, if you're going to affirm ed, then you have to affirm that E of ed, the exhaustive. That means that God causally determined Adam's nature, that causally determined him to fall from the good, right? And so he didn't have the ability then in that circumstance to do what was good, because the antecedent conditions were sufficient to necessitate the effect of the fall. And therefore, it doesn't make, most people, it seems, would have the intuition that why should Adam be blamed for a nature that God causally determined him to possess, which necessitated the fall, right? He could not do otherwise. So anyway, it seems to me that points 1 and 2 of chapter 9 of the LBC heavily imply, if they're not clear, they heavily imply what I call libertarian freedom. So if point 1 was not clear enough, I think point 2 clarifies that Adam had the freedom and power to do the good, but was unstable so that he might fall into sin. But that sure seems like an ability to do otherwise. Would you agree with me, Danny?
Yeah, and I think there's a sense in which he recognized it too, right? Because he specifically, his reply was, well, that was pre-fall, right? And the idea here is all you have to do to show that exhaustive divine determinism is false is to show only one case in the world, in the actual world, in which someone had a libertarian sense of free will, right? Mm-hmm. So it is kind of a question for me why he would emphasize that it was pre-fall. It doesn't matter whether it was pre-fall or not. To show that exhaustive divine determinism is false, all you need is one case at any time increment, right? At any time interval, right? So that's
right.
what I've noticed there too. But are you good with continuing?
Yeah, just let me add that before we go, if that's okay, because you're in charge right now. But an omniscient God knows all that could or might occur, and all that would happen if God creates Adam with this libertarian creaturely freedom. Thus, God can still predestine the fall of Adam, if Molinism is true. God can predestine the fall of Adam without making him do it by way of cause and effect. So God simply created a world with the end game in mind, in which he knew how Adam would freely choose. But here's the point. One could be well within the boundaries of Reformed theology and reject Ed. Consider W.G.T. Shedd. Because I brought this up but didn't get to read it. Shedd said this, who's recognized as a Reformed theologian. He said, in respect to its having no sinful antecedent, recognize that word, right? In respect to its having no sinful antecedent out of which it's made, sin is origination ex nihilo. Sin is the beginning of something from nothing, and there is this resemblance between it and creation proper. In holy Adam, there was no sinful inclination or corruption that prompted the first transgression. Adam started the wicked inclination itself ex nihilo by a causative act of self-determination. So this is what we mean by libertarian freedom, and Shedd rejects Ed. So bottom line, you can be a Reformed theologian and disagree with James White on this topic, just as many Reformed scholars do. If pre-fall Adam possessed libertarian freedom, as you said, Danny, then Ed is false. And if God never gained this knowledge of the fall of Adam, then God possesses middle knowledge, and some flavor of Molinism is true, but we can unpack that more as we go on.
All right. Now I'm going to probably increase the speed to 1.25. Our audience will let us know if it's too fast and if we can't keep up. Otherwise, we'll be here for 5 hours because this is all rich material. So we'll go. I hope the chat will let us know if it's too fast.
You would have to bring in two other aspects of the confession. So the first would be the assertion of God's absolute sovereignty and decree and determination of all things that take place in time. And then secondly, the material in regards to Adam's federal headship and the fall of man. So yes, but that's not all it says.
Right. Okay. But you do affirm this confession. Right. Good. Okay. So that helps me as we move forward. Because that's exactly what I mean by libertarian freedom. Exactly what I mean. There's no difference. We seem to both affirm the same thing, but call it something else. So it seems that.
Do you want me to comment on that statement? Or
well, you can maybe ask me questions here, but I've got some follow-up. So
Big mistake.
Yeah. So we discussed this. The idea is that the confession flew by the audience and by Dr. White really fast. It would have been good to say, hey, what the confession affirms are these 2 points. Libertarianism also affirms these 2 points. And so if you accept the confession, you accept libertarian free will. That would have helped people kind of track what you're saying, because you may not even be wrong here, right? In fact, it seems like you're not. So it's just at this point, it's really, really being as clear as you can. Primarily, you want to be there's a hierarchy in terms of who you want to be clear with. Number one is your audience. Okay, that's in a debate, right? It's your audience, the judges. That's who you need to be most clear to. Now that will indirectly be clear to your interlocutor, your whoever you're debating, right? But the point is that if your audience is with you, right, in terms of clarity, and they're not with him, those are huge points, whether you're right or wrong, right?
Yeah.
So you always want to stop and say, is the audience with me? You know, why do I think they're with me right now? Oh, because I spelled out 1 and 2, right, for them, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I didn't know if you wanted to comment before we proceed.
Yeah, just briefly. I think in your video, when you critiqued this the first time, I think you said that I was too rushed here, and that I just, without spelling it out, I just rushed, even though I believe I'm right about this. I rushed it and I didn't clarify it to the audience. I will say that I learned quickly. I realized that there was no way I was going to win this audience. I think it's fair to say that around 85%, maybe 90% was pro hardcore fans of James White before the debate even started. So the place was packed. I realized the crowd was against me. and for Dr. White. So I realized I couldn't win the crowd, but I should have. And I did want to see how many, if I could pick any of them off, and I think I did. But I realized that what was more important was going to be the YouTube crowd for years to come. Can I win that crowd? And I hope that that was accomplished, but the jury's still out. But yeah, you're exactly right, Danny. I rushed into this. It's true, but I didn't make it clear. So big mistake on my part.
All right, let's go on.
I'm happy to let you call libertarian freedom whatever you'd like, but be that as it may, I'm glad that we affirm the same concept, because I do affirm that concept. That's what I describe as libertarian freedom. That's what every Molinist I know.
These aren't questions.
Sorry.
These are statements that I disagree with.
All right. Well, okay. You got three.
We're not saying the same thing.
Can I
So
have
no
more
matter
time?
how hard you want to push it, we're not saying the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's way too far away.
Give me a little bit more. Okay, so we both agree on the same concept. Number one, do you agree that God was sovereign over the first sin?
Yes.
Good, I agree.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by sovereign
No,
over the first sin?
we can talk about that later. We both agree that God was sovereign over the first sin. Two.
So there, really quickly, do you agree that in some sense God is sovereign, and then move on, right? And then you can elaborate on that, but we'll continue.
Okay.
Do you agree that God decreed and predestined the first sin?
Yes.
Amen to that. Me too. Three, do you agree that God knew the first sin would occur before the foundation of the world and before he created the universe, or did he gain this knowledge at a later time?
No, God decreed to
Did he know it?
time.
Did he know it or not before the foundation of the world?
It's a nonsense question.
No.
Okay, this is frustrating. This would have been frustrating if I were you, Dr. Stratton. It's not a nonsense question, right? It's either God did not know or did know prior to creation what you would do or what would happen to creation. And it's and then I think he's about to explain himself here, but we'll see if we're satisfied.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, if you can define your terms and then force me to use them, I can do the same
okay.
thing.
Well, I'm going to
answer the question, Tim.
Okay.
I'm not going to be railroaded. Okay, I've been down this road before.
You've been debating for over 30 years.
You see, I don't think you're railroading him here. I think you asked a clear question, and it's a cross-examination technically, and we'll get into this later, the nature of a cross-examination. But you were asking legitimate questions, and then he kind of he derailed by saying it was nonsense when it wasn't really nonsense. So that's the way I saw this. Did you want to quickly comment on that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, how is asking if God possessed knowledge prior to the divine decree or before the foundation of the world a nonsense question? That's like asking if, can God create or it's not like asking if God can create a married bachelor. That'd be a nonsense question. So I really should have pressed him here. Again, big rookie mistake. I also didn't like me saying, oh, well, you've been debating for 30 years and this is my first. That's not needed. So when I heard that, I was just like, oh, man, don't do that kind of stuff again.
And to be fair to you, he did say, I'm not going to be railroaded. It was already sounding kind of aggressive tone. So I think that's part of one of the reasons why you said that. But maybe. I think I would have just skipped it. I think it seems like I think that you had a lot of momentum coming from the beginning. So I think you could have ridden that momentum rather than saying, oh, well, you're more experienced. But we'll continue.
Doesn't matter. The point is this. The issues of everything to do with God's creation flow from his will. And the reason he knows these things is because he has decreed to act according to his nature. So what else?
Did he ever not know this? Is there any state?
That's like asking, did he ever not know he was going to create and everything was going to happen in time?
So he knew it from.
You're asking a time-based question of an eternal being. It doesn't make any sense.
Anyway, you've at least agreed with two, and I think you're agreeing with a third. So, Dr.
Yeah, like you said, you could have taken more time. I think you could say, you do this. So I applaud you. It's a true dichotomy, Dr. White, either God did not know or did know prior to creation. I think you did do that. It should, I think that this is, a lot. If we're scoring this, right, this is a loss of points on Dr. White in this moment. So,
Dr. White, all I needed for you is to agree with at least one of those. And so I just like to be the first to welcome you to Molinism, because you're a Molinist. You are. You've affirmed the concepts. You have, Dr. White. You've affirmed the concepts that I've defined in my opening speech. Right?
Yeah. So this point, when you're a Molinist, I think you should say, well, you affirmed, if you had set it up, the earlier questions where he's affirming 1, 2, and 3, and 4, right? Then you can charge him. But if it's so premature, he's just going to be like, no, right? And the whole audience are not really, since they're not really following, especially what happened with the confessions, right? This is a premature kind of charge, right? Did you want to say anything?
Yeah. I instead of saying, well, I'd like to be the first to welcome you to Team Molinism, I just came across wrong. In my head, I was thinking, oh, this is my Perry Mason moment, and the entire crowd's going to go, oh, he's a Molinist, and oh, that didn't happen. And I just sound like an idiot. I don't like how I came across. I looking at it now, I should have said, well, man, you're saying these things. Can you please describe to me or explain to me how this isn't Molinism or what I describe as mere Molinism or something like that? What would you suggest?
Yeah, so you would say if you accept that God knew before, God knew all of what we would do prior to him creating, and if you accept that confession, right, which it dictates that that EDD is false, well, then I take Molinism to affirm those 2 points fundamentally. So that would make you a Molinist. And at that point, he has to engage for White to say, "Nuh-uh," right there. Yeah. That would make him look bad. He has to engage with your argument for how you got to the conclusion. Because if he just says "nuh-uh" to your conclusion with your argument, he's not going to look good. So that's how I would have done it.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Right? Using the definitions.
That is a statement, and I'm going to respond to it
good.
as if it was a question. Okay. Am I affirming the statements? No, I am not.
All right, you can.
I am
all right,
not
let me ask the questions. Let me ask the questions.
Okay, we're losing control.
Yeah.
We need clear questions.
I've asked 3 very clear questions. All right. Let me move to the next question now that we're both Molinists. In your book, The Forgotten Trinity, again, I love this book, you write that most importantly, we ought to be drawn heavenward by the very attributes of God that turn the worldly person cold, and in fact are often the most offensive to the natural or unsaved man. Do we love God, all of God, including the tough parts of his nature, or do we refuse to bow before those elements that cause us problems? If we love God, we will not dare to edit him to fit our desires. But Dr. White, the irony here is...
Yeah, and that's another thing, is that it's sort of like if you accuse someone without evidence, what can they do to you to show that you don't have evidence? They can accuse you of the same thing, right? Yeah. You're a liar. No, you're a liar. And then you're with a he said, she said scenario, and then you're back to having to re-argue everything, right? Yeah. So that's kind of like a rhetorical point on him. He knew that it wasn't clear that you showed that he was a Molinist, so he could just say, "You're not a Molinist," right?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. So, but anyways,
I opened the door for him, right?
What'd you say? I'm pausing.
You said you ceased to be a Molinist.
I said you just ceased to be a Molinist. So thank you.
All right. Pausing this, getting some more time back. Dr. White, the irony here is that, I mean, you're now a Molinist, so I'm a little confused, but if you reject Molinism, you would be editing God, subtracting from his perfect power or knowledge, because it causes problems with your philosophy of ed, which is nowhere found in Scripture, which is what you have to affirm to demonstrate that libertarian freedom is never possessed. It seems that you're violating...
That's a question. That's a question.
No, it's not. It seems that you are violating your own rules expressed in the Forgotten Trinity. So here's my question. Do you affirm that prior to the foundation of the world, that God exists necessarily as the perfect standard of power and knowledge, yes or no?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question that was first asked. You made an entire speech that was filled with false assertions. I'm going to answer that. I am not contradicting what I said in the Forgotten Trinity. And in fact, I would say it's Molinism that is fulfilling that, because it is God's absolute sovereign freedom over all, including the decisions of man, that Molinism rejects. That's the thing that you all don't like, and that's why you've come up with your system. So I am not in any way, shape, or form a Molinist. I am not in any way inconsistent with my statement. So the actual question was...
do you affirm that prior to the foundation of the world, God exists necessarily as the perfect standard of power and knowledge, yes or no?
Well, of course, God is God.
Then you affirm middle knowledge.
No, I do not.
God, no, I'll tell you why. Because if God is the perfect standard of power,
you're preaching again.
Okay.
Now you see, they claim, and then you were going to explain it, right? You were going to explain it, and he just kind of went right over you, which is this. If you're facing a charitable interlocutor, you can get away with this. You can say, well, here's my claim. Let me give the support. Okay. But with uncharitable interlocutors, right, or confrontational cases, argument always goes first, right? So I guess that maybe, generally speaking, I don't want to set these are like laws of debate, but that's what I would have done here. Did you want to say anything?
Well, it was so frustrating to me. I mean, you could tell I was frustrated before we even got to cross-ex because I thought, wow, he's never going to interact with my argument, with my primary case or my 4 key contentions. He had 2 opportunities to do it and ignored it. I was already frustrated about this. Then when I'm like, okay, well, if you affirm all this, then you affirm middle knowledge. He's like, no, I don't. And I say, let me tell you why. Now, it seems like if you're really committed to truth, even if it's not official or, it's not the official rules of the debate, you should want to hear that. But he says, oh, you're preaching again. This, don't tell me why it's true. Don't let the audience know why. And I really started to, it still gets me a little bit right now.
Yeah, it was very clear that you did it right. You gave the claim, you were going to support it, right? Because it is a claim, it needs to be supported in debate, okay? But he just kind of seemed like he hand waved it as what, preaching? What did he say? But
yeah, you're preaching again.
Yeah, we're going to continue.
Ask questions, please.
Okay. He doesn't want to know why. He's a Molinist. All right. Next question. How much time do I have?
You see, there, I think that I could be wrong. That seemed you seemed like you were a little bit intimidated there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would have been like, no, this is an important point. This is the heart of what I'm trying to say. So let me give you the argument first, right? But maybe you weren't, I would always, jumping between points can be effective. It's kind of tricky. There's a lot of decision making here. So it's not quite clear what you exactly should have done. But I think it would have been your rights to be like, no, this is critical to my thesis here. So,
yeah, I guess at that moment I felt like, oh, I'm breaking the rules. I better stop. That's why I didn't clarify. So yeah, I mean, do you think I would have been justified in saying no? Hold on a second.
Yes, I would have done that. I would have done it. No, I'm not moving on from this. Is the central thesis of my view, right? Like this is what the main contention I have. So this needs to be clear. And you could even, there's rhetorical things you can do. Like, look, this might be my fault in miscommunication. Let me try to communicate better my point. You could do that, right? As to lower, to kind of chill, you could take to say, this might be my fault. Because in a sense, when you're trying to communicate and they don't understand you, then, you don't want to repeat the same exact way you communicated. Maybe change it up. And that's a way of revising and trying to show that you're trying to communicate, right? So you can always say, look, let me try it differently. I'm not communicating this well. So let me try it again. I do that often, and I wouldn't say it lowers the defenses. It just lowers the aggro level because there's high aggro here, and it's unhealthy for a dialogue like this.
Great advice. I'm going to take it. I'm taking that advice.
Okay. All right. Based upon your book, The God Who Justifies. I've been reading your stuff for a while. I do look up to you.
Needs to help you.
Dr. White, you write this.
I love you too.
I love you too, man. You look like my older brother. I mean,
we even wore the same jacket tonight.
All right.
You see, honestly, I think this is good, right? It brings the aggro level down. That was, I don't know who started this, but I know Dr. White occasionally throws a joke in. I think that was actually good stuff, right? Because it shows that, look, we're in the debate mode, really. Like I did, at some point they blame the moderator for something and you'll pretend to. I think this is all actually good. It makes the debate doesn't come across as totally confrontational. So this is good.
Yeah. Okay.
But my question is, can you
let me get to this, because now he's stealing all my time. He's crafty. Okay. Let me get through this question. And then I'll give him this time. You write, if God is the God of truth, then what he inspired will be consistent with itself. I agree with that. And you correctly imply that if God is the God of truth, then we can trust Scripture. Will you agree with that? Okay. But on the exhaustive divine deterministic view that you must affirm in order to say that we never have libertarian freedom, then it follows that God is the sufficient cause of Christians having false biblical interpretations of Scripture. Yes or no?
Not what the Bible teaches, no.
Pardon me?
That's not what the Bible teaches.
I know. That's why I rejected you.
The Bible teaches that Christians are to grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, and that God likewise, in his judgment, has sent false prophets and caused people who refuse to love the truth.
Do you have perfect theology?
I'm sorry?
Do you have perfect theology?
No, I do not.
Okay, so where you're wrong, if God causally determines all things, that means that God causally determined you to affirm false theological beliefs, and now you have a defeater against God being the God of truth. So how do you reconcile God causing you to affirm false theological beliefs and also calling him the God of truth?
Your argument.
You see, this was a very clear argument to me. This was very well done. He tried to talk over you for a second, right? And you persisted. I think that was good. Okay. because this is again another central key thesis to your, or a central point to what you're saying, is that if God causally determines everything, including our beliefs and desires, well, then we got a lot of false beliefs about God, right? So we don't want to say that God causes or is responsible, causally responsible for our false beliefs about him. So at least not the typical Christian. So I think that's a very, very good point to bring up. And I can just tell that he's not that interested in the argument, but we'll try. We'll see what happens.
Just said that God is not in charge of my state of sanctification. I am to grow.
Are you going to be caused and determined?
Your argument, Tim, would require you to state that the moment you were converted, that you had to be given perfect theology.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
And that is
no.
not.
That is definitely not what you were saying. I'm very confused by his response here. In fact, if you're, what I do when I get irritated, I'm like, look, this is simple. I don't mean to complicate this. It's either that we have false beliefs. Did God causally determine our false beliefs about him? Right. And to me, it's not complicated. And I think that I would say that once again, for the sake of the argument, for the audience, right? You want to bring the audience along with you, right? Saying, hey, it's simple. You have false beliefs. We have false beliefs about God, right? So God causally determined that, yes or no? If it's a no, then EDD is false. And then your whole argument goes through, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I'll just add, different views of epistemology, whether you have externalism, something along the lines of Alvin Plantinga, or internalism, it doesn't matter, as long as, if Ed is true, and that means that he causally determines all things. And as soon as one says, I don't have perfect theology, that one of my theological beliefs, at least one of my theological beliefs, is false, then that means that God is the one, whether it's internalism, externalism, or whatever, that God is the one that causally determines you to affirm a false belief about him. And you don't stand in a position to evaluate, because your evaluations are also causally determined by the same deity of deceptions. Your judgments are determined by him too. It's like wondering if CNN is trustworthy. And so you go to the fact checkers and they tell you, oh, CNN is completely trustworthy. But then you find out that the fact checkers work for and are employed by CNN. And so you really haven't gotten anywhere. So my point is, as soon as you marry any view of epistemology to Ed, any view is going to go down with Ed. So I can talk about that more later if it comes up. But
to summarize what you're saying, the point is that if God caused your false beliefs, he has morally sufficient reasons for causing that, which means that can you even trust your own sense perception if he's gonna, if having false beliefs is in the game in terms of what God can do, then how are you going to trust things, right? Like, I think that's kind of the idea. And so you want to distance yourself from that.
Yeah. And what some have said is like, well, God has morally sufficient reasons to deceive me. I'm like, okay, great. He's still a deity of deception if he's got morally sufficient reasons or not. And you don't know which of your theological beliefs about him are true and which of them are false. You can beg the question and, just assume that you're right, but you also know you're not infallible. So I think it's a big problem as soon as you affirm Ed and the fact that you're not infallible.
Yeah. And historically, and very briefly, I'm not going to do very long, but Descartes tried, one of the ways he got out of his skepticism is depending that God would not compromise his cognitive faculties and his web of beliefs, right? That's a way that a lot of people have historically relied on a lot of epistemological postulates or things that we can rely on for knowledge, because there is an all good God that would not cause you to have misperceive or be completely deluded.
Yeah.
Right? So anyways.
So White's a presuppositionalist, but really what I've been pointing out to some presuppositionalists lately is you can't just presuppose the truth of Scripture. You have to presuppose the author of Scripture is a maximally great being. Because as soon as you don't presuppose God's maximal greatness, now you have reason to doubt. If he's not perfectly good and all loving, if he's not the God of truth, then why should we trust it? If he is the God of truth, but not powerful enough to get us the correct information, now you have a defeater to that. And we can go on, but you must presuppose that God is a maximally great being.
Yeah, let's move on.
not what the Bible
Okay,
teaches.
I'm
It
telling
is
you.
God has. Tim, do you want an answer? Because I've answered you on this before, and you know that.
It
Do you
wasn't
want
a
an answer that
correct
everyone can
answer.
understand?
I would
I'll
encourage
do it in
people to
30
watch our
seconds.
video
I'll do
exchange
it.
too.
What the audio went really fast, but White this is just totally, this is a minus points on White. I think you don't say in a debate, remember who's the debate for? I think primarily is for the audience, right? To say that, well, I talked about this with you back, a year ago, right? Then you're doing a disservice to the audience because the audience doesn't know what happened in that conversation. They want to know what's going on here, right? So I think right now what I would have done and responded. This is not really a serious mistake. It's just it's a curveball. I'll tell you that. This is an absolute curveball to say we discussed this before. I think I think you could have just said, well, look, they haven't heard us discuss it, so let's do justice to the audience.
Nice.
Anyways.
We're out of time, but the fact of the matter is God's purpose is being fulfilled as he grows me in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, and that does not require that I have a perfect theology from the beginning.
But what follows is if God causally determines everything, then he causes you to affirm false theological beliefs about him.
Let's get to the right time here.
Yeah, so this is a cross-examination. I think that we've discussed this. This is my preference. If I do debates, I don't want a cross-examination after an opener or a rebuttal or anything like that. I want open conversation because you did good to reaffirm your point, but now the clock has saved him. The bell has rung, right? And I feel like a free-flowing conversation would have been better for the audience.
Yeah.
But so next time, if I were to be offered, I would check: is it a cross-examination or can it just be free, open conversation?
Yeah, I'll ask for that next time. Thank you.
All right, Tim, I'd like you to take a Bible, please, because this is a debate on is Molinism biblical? And I would like to ask you some questions about some of the texts that we have been looking at and get your response to them. Could you look with me at John chapter 6, please? And could you explain to me in light of, well, I suppose I need to ask a question. You have not this evening, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have not this evening ever used the phrase true subjunctive conditional, am I right?
That's correct.
Do you accept or reject that terminology used by William Lane Craig?
I don't reject it, but I typically use CCF's counterfactuals of creaturely freedom instead.
Would you, is it your position that those are the same thing?
God clearly in Scripture demonstrates that he has knowledge of counterfactuals of at least he possessed counterfactual knowledge, and it's what seems to be a creaturely freedom.
So do you have a problem with Bill Craig's assertion that these true subjunctive conditionals delimit God's decree?
When has knowledge ever delimited anybody? Knowledge is power, and you can be ignorant and not know of what might limit you, but saying that these true subjunctive conditionals no more limit God than saying God, an omnipotent God, cannot do the logically impossible. Just because God doesn't have the power to create a fourth person of the Godhead, we don't say, oh no, God is delimited. He can't create a world. He's delimited by this.
That's fine, but the reality is, I'm just trying to find out if your Molinism is lesser than other people's Molinism, because there are all sorts of different takes and versions.
Well,
so
you got my book.
I do.
It's called mere
I
Molinism, which is different from
I
a lot of people argue.
But mere Molinism still has to have middle knowledge as its key element. And when I say delimiting God's decree, do you believe that middle knowledge is taken into consideration by God in determining what are and what are not possible or feasible worlds?
If God created a being or
So let me did you understand White's question there? Was it that could I translate that as, does God use his middle knowledge to determine how the creation would be? How did you interpret White's question there?
Well, I guess, okay, well, maybe you should rewind a little bit, because I was kind of just thinking about how he said that middle knowledge delimited. So then I didn't listen to that last part.
Than other people's Molinism, because there are all sorts of different takes and versions.
Well,
so
you got my book.
I do.
It's called mere
Molinism,
Molinism, which is different from a lot of people argue.
But mere Molinism still has to have middle knowledge as its key element. And when I say delimiting God's decree, do you believe that middle knowledge is taken into consideration by God in determining what are and what are not possible or feasible worlds?
If God...
That was a very difficult question to understand, because it wasn't quite, does God use middle knowledge to, prior to creation, do he use his middle knowledge to like set up the actual world. He said something different. He said something about possibility. Does God use middle knowledge to decide or to determine what the possibilities? And that's a confused question. I didn't understand.
Yeah, he doesn't use it to decide. He simply, if he's omniscient and if he has middle knowledge, then he simply knows what's possible, what's feasible, what's impossible. He knows everything he could create and everything that would happen in any situation that he could make actual. So yeah,
I'm not saying it's a mistake on White's part. I was just wondering what you thought, because I had a hard time understanding.
Yeah, I guess I would like more clarification from him there. After listening to it several times, I'm still not clear about what he means there. So,
created a being or a creature who could choose between two options, each compatible with his nature in a specific circumstance, then that means the antecedent conditions are insufficient to causally necessitate the creature's choice. Now, if the antecedent conditions are sufficient, then there is not two options, there is only one. So it's either true or false. That's why I kept saying, if libertarian freedom is even possessed once, even if it's by Adam, even if by pre-fall Adam, if Adam had that libertarian freedom, what you call creaturely freedom, so if Adam has that freedom, then God knows how Adam will choose within his creaturely or libertarian freedom. If God has the knowledge prior to the creation of the world, how Adam would freely choose. In the London Baptist Confession, I've never seen anything so clear, especially going back centuries, so clear as to define what we mean today by libertarian freedom. If you affirm the London Baptist Confession, I mean, see, you're shaking your head out there, but we as Molinists, we know what we mean by that. I've explained what we mean by that. And you can say, no, that's not what you mean by that.
Hey, Tim,
well, that's
Tim,
what that is.
You've gone on for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think you did overall great there. I think then towards the end, I think sometimes less is more. You should. So there, if I could take, let's say, if it was like a whole interval, I would have taken the last bit out and then just left him with that and see how he responded. But also, yeah, alluding to the audience. I mean, maybe how was it? Like, were they just giving you these looks? Like, how did it feel?
Yeah, no, there was this guy like in the, I don't think he was the front row, but in the second row. And he was just like, I mean, I felt like almost like he was just coming out without touching me, like coming after me. And I was like, what, dude? It was really kind of I felt like I had to say something. And then as soon as it came out of my mouth, I'm like, no, I should not have done that. So
but the point is that out of the last 30 seconds, this was all good stuff. This is understandable stuff to me, right? Maybe because I've heard it 4 times, but nothing that you said was incoherent. So what does he say here? I think he dismisses it. Let's listen.
Oh, please interrupt me. It's your time.
Did God use this alleged middle knowledge in determining what worlds he could feasibly create? Yes or no?
Not a clear question.
Did it delimit what worlds he could create?
That's like saying, did God...
This is not something that Bill Craig and I had to argue about.
All right. But I wish you should have talked about it.
Yeah, that was a low blow. And I will say that, yeah, go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, play it for another couple seconds.
We did.
Does God use his knowledge that he cannot create a person of the Godhead?
That's not what I'm asking.
Yeah, that was a low blow. Let me just say, and I didn't catch this question now, but now that I'm really listening to this question, I still don't understand it. It's not because what I understand is that it makes sense to say God uses middle knowledge to actualize a particular world. That makes sense. But it doesn't make sense to say God uses middle knowledge to decide what's possible.
No,
that doesn't make sense. So it was not an intelligible question. And then he says, well, I didn't have to do this with Craig, as if to say that like I'm stooping down a level here with you. But really, the question was no good. It was not a clear question. The first time I heard this, I thought he was asking the first type of question. Did God use middle knowledge to decide what kind of world we have now, the actual world? But that's not what he was asking. So I could see why you were justifiably confused here. Okay. So anyways, we'll continue.
The limit that he can't create that circumstance.
You're changing my question.
Well, all it is saying that God can't do the logically impossible. And that's not. And reform.
And I don't know what was going through your mind. I don't know how you interpreted the question. But if you interpreted the question the way I just did, you got to get hit. It's okay to say, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're asking. Can you rephrase the question? But I don't know. Maybe you interpreted him differently, but it's hard to know only you knew what was going on in your head.
No, and I think I was so being very nervous in the first place. I wasn't understanding his question. Looking back on it now, if I would have had 30 seconds to think about it, but when you got to answer on the fly, I was like, why am I not getting this like I should be? Especially when he said, "Oh, well, Dr. Craig," and I was like, "Oh gosh, what am I missing in front of everybody?" And I think that added to my frustration and my being frazzled. But
Well, if it makes you feel better, it wasn't an intelligible question.
I feel a little bit better, just a little bit.
I think that, let me tell you my experiences. You see, we've all grown. My philosophy's changed a lot. And when I talk to my professors, my philosophy professors, you know what, sometimes, especially early in my days, you know what their common response to me is like, I don't know what you're saying. Right. Like I really don't. Can you rephrase it? I'm not getting it. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right. Even if, look, the point is that you're up there, you're Dr. Stratton. You don't need to prove it yourself to anyone. If you don't understand something, ask for clarification. More than likely, there's something wrong with your question, like in this case, right? So it's okay to say, I don't know what you're saying, right? I do that all the time, right? So, but when I first reviewed this video, I kind of overlooked this, but I didn't understand. He needs to clarify that question.
Reformed theologians, which, by the way, I am Reformed, by the way, and Reformed theology.
Not in this created world.
Yeah, he's good rhetorically. This was, you know, he's in his home. What do you call it? I'm not a sports person. He's at home. What is it?
Yeah, he's in the sweet spot.
There you go.
Right.
Let's talk about it. I affirm election. I affirm predestination. I affirm monergism.
Who chooses the elect?
God.
Freely?
Yes.
Based upon what he knows they will do, or can he save any person he chooses to save?
God can force anybody into his presence that he wants to.
I didn't say force anyone.
Okay, so you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I'm talking about force, I'm not talking about force against one's will, or that coercion with the gun to the back of your head. I'm talking about the kind of force that one would set up the antecedent conditions to causally necessitate the effect, their desired effect. If that's not force, I don't know what is. And I looked at the definitions, all the different definitions of force. Yes, force, you can use force against one's will in a coercive sense, but there's all kinds of force that would be compatible with the way I'm using it too. So does that make sense to you, Danny?
Yeah, it does make sense to me. As far as what happened here, this is what happens when you don't clarify a question. He might have, to Dr. White's credit, he might have an intelligible question, but he's definitely not phrasing it right. So what happens is that he has an intelligible question, he's vocalizing it wrong, and then rather than getting clarification, you're answering a question that he doesn't have in mind, and so now he thinks that you're either dodging or not understanding, and then the conversation starts to, because of the lack of clarity, right? So I think that's what happened here, because I feel like your response doesn't make sense on any kind of interpretation, though, of his question. So he's not going to feel like his question is being met, and that causes a little bit of discord. But anyway, let's continue.
When his presidency wants to.
Okay. Well, God can. God,
no Reformed theologian would ever put it that way.
Well, let's go back to the London Baptist Confession.
It certainly doesn't use the term force.
It doesn't have force?
No,
let me see.
It's not.
Where did it?
Okay,
I was looking. You know who did say? I think it was Shed.
It does use the word force.
Again, coercion and force is not the terminology.
Okay, because you brought up the coercion.
But
and no Molinism is like, you put a gun to your head. No, we don't talk about a gun to the back of your head. What we talk about is God creating the antecedent conditions that are.
So what this looked like is, I'm confused. I think the audience is mostly confused. You're riled up, and we don't know why. So I think that's what's going on. And so because we don't know that you're riled up, all we see is that you're riled up.
Yeah. So there's several things, and I got really bad right there. I think I had to stop because as I was talking, I realized words weren't coming out of my mouth. I think maybe it wasn't here. It was some point. I remember at this point feeling like, why is there sand in my mouth? I've never, ever had cotton mouth so badly as I did during the cross-examination. But I was riled up because he said, oh, LBC doesn't say anything about force. And I was like, really? I could have sworn. And what I should have done is just gone right back to it, brought it up on my screen. But it does. it says that God does not force. And so it does. It actually uses that term. And he says it didn't. And so that really got me flustered. And Shed doesn't use it. I shared Shed earlier. But I was like, I know one of those two doesn't. I've studied this. So,
yeah, I'm not saying Dr. White is. I don't think he's a doctor yet. I think he's getting his PhD.
No,
so,
he's got a doctorate.
Okay, I'm making sure.
I don't think it's accredited, but I don't care about that.
Yeah, I'll say Dr. White. I have no problem. So I don't think Dr. White's doing this intentionally, but he might have really sincerely believed this. But it's a form of unintentional gaslighting, and that can really throw you off because all I got is sometimes my reason, but being misinformed about what a passage says and stuff like that, I usually concede. I'm like, okay, I guess I was wrong about that because you're telling me I was wrong with the word coercion, and that can throw things off. But I think that's why I like to really, as best as I can in debate, and sometimes you can't avoid it, especially in this debate because you're talking about the biblical support for Molinism, which is empirical to some degree. Why, if you have an option, I stick with a priori stuff, like things that I can think about rather than things that I have to actually like recall, like what did the passage say? But it's hard to do that. And the debate is citing the Bible as supporting or not supporting. So it's tricky with empirical stuff, right? So this is a sticky situation to be put in. And if I were you, I would have probably done the same thing. Oh, it doesn't, right? Like I would have caused doubt in myself. But then I would have tried to move to an a priori point, right? That's how I would have. But it's very sticky. It comes with his lack of clarity, and then you not asking for clarification, and then we get confusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sufficient to causally necessitate the effect. They're either, man, I got.
But you're not. Okay. Let's get back to the question I'm trying to ask. This is sort of foundational. Before we can get into the biblical stuff, I just need a simple answer. Are there worlds that God did not create because of his middle knowledge? How's that? Is that a
sure? And I would say there are worlds that God didn't create because he can't create a fourth person of the Godhead or make it.
Well, first of all, I think that's another unclear question. Does God, because of his middle knowledge, leave certain worlds uncreated? Is that what was that what you heard?
Yeah, I don't know. It was. I mean, I know he affirms God's natural knowledge. Well, I think he does. He's not clear about that actually, because sometimes he makes statements on some of his videos that God creates the truth value to all propositions. Well, if that's the case, then prior to the decree, then God literally knows nothing. And that's got to be way worse than the open theism he rejects. But I don't think he would affirm that if he was pressed. I think he would say, no, God at least has natural knowledge. And then he could say, well, are there worlds God didn't create because of his natural knowledge? And I wish I would have said that at the time, but it's.
But maybe I'm not understanding what it means to say I didn't create a world because God didn't create a world because of his middle knowledge, right? I'm trying. I guess in the sense that God has middle knowledge about some horrible event that would have happened to you, and because of that, he didn't actualize that world. I think that's what he meant. Like there's a world in which God has middle. You see, again, not very clear, and I think you jump right into trying to explain something. Again, I don't want to repeat myself. Just ask for clarity. Clarity. That's what, if you read any philosophy paper, like if you go to school for any kind of English, a humanities degree, clarity in your paper is so important. Same thing with debates, right? If you're not clear, this is what happens, right? Anyways.
Good advice.
Atheism true.
So the choices of men, when they would accept Christ, the conditions, do you believe that God knows what conditions to put someone into so that they would freely accept Christ?
Yes.
Does that involve regeneration? Or does it result in regeneration?
It results in regeneration, if I'm understanding.
Okay, so God knows what position,
God does all the work in regeneration.
Okay, God knows what context to put individuals into who are unregenerate, whereby they will accept Christ.
No, I believe that the Holy Spirit has to work. No one comes to God. No one seeks God. No, not one. God does all the work. He does all the drawing. He does all the work. I'm a monergist.
I'm a
monergist.
And so anyone who is saved solely and completely through the.
I just saw someone on the test. This is off topic, but if you think this is off topic, who's bringing this up? Right. It's his turn to ask the question. So if if we establish, I'm not going to take the time to establish that this is off topic. Frankly, I don't know enough about this part of the theology to say that it's whether it's off topic or not. Maybe you do, but if it's off topic, it was Dr. White that brought up the
Yeah, but I want to own some of that too. It is Phil Bear is right. It was off topic, and I kind of, as I watch this now, sometimes I kind of feel like a dog, where I'm looking at James White and I'm like, squirrel, and I'd go after all these squirrels. As you said in your review on your channel, you said, hey, a debater has to be hyper focused, and I wish I would have talked to you beforehand.
Well, in an open dialogue, yes, but if you're really sticking to the cross-examination, really, he could ask you, what's your favorite color? And then technically, you have to ask, it's not your fault that you're answering the question, but we'll go on.
Yeah, and Phil just says here that the regeneration aspect is irrelevant.
I wouldn't know. That's up to but if it is irrelevant, it was Dr. White that brought it up.
Yeah, it was irrelevant to the case I made. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Of the work of Christ by the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Okay. What about the lost? Is there just no position they can be put in where they would freely choose Christ? And is that based on
now I will just say, I'm not sure about that. And we've drifted into soteriological matters. That's not the topic of tonight's debate. And I made that clear. I can grant all 5 points of Calvinism for tonight's debate because there is no contradiction with what I have argued in my opening statement. In my opening statement, I made it clear what I meant by that human sometimes, even if it's just Christians, even if it's Adam, if there's ever a libertarian free choice anywhere, ever in the history of creation, and God knew it prior to the foundations of the world, prior to his decree, then you've got some flavor of Molinism.
Okay, then why did you come up with Trump? That's a different thing.
No.
I don't know why you did that. I mean, talk about that.
Yeah. And so if you'd like to read about that, it's in the Mere Molinism study guide. We've got that for sale.
Which includes resistible grace.
Resistible, amazing grace. But let me tell you, for the sake of tonight's topic, is Molinism biblical? That's not under the scope of debate. So for the topic of tonight, Dr. White, I will grant you your soteriology. I will grant you all 5 points.
I'm not asking for you to do that. I'm not asking you to do that. And I deny the fact that Molinism can be separated from soteriology.
You did good here.
Because the man who designed it to be soteriologically significant.
Okay, so here's a good point. Molina actually got his ideas from others. Molina was the first one to make clear distinctions and use the words middle knowledge and stuff like. But these go all the way. The idea of middle knowledge goes all the way back to the AD 300s, to the time of Augustine. Dr. Kurt Jarris has recently written on this and presented papers.
Jarris, that's who it was.
Yeah, this is a lot, and a lot for. I mean, I feel like if I was the average person in the audience, I just would probably zone out. I think the point is that all you need to just say, if he asks for evidence, then you can, but you say, all you can say, look, some of these ideas predate Molina, so it's not strictly soteriological, right? And that's all you need to say.
Well, and not Molina's attempt to destroy the Reformation, because this is.
But this is a small mistake, so.
I ran after that squirrel here.
And Dr. Jarris, you can read more about this at veracityhill.com. But these ideas go back to the time of Augustine, way before Molina lived. So this isn't Molina's attempt to destroy the Reformation. No, this goes all the way back.
So Molina was not trying to destroy the Reformation.
I'll tell you this. I can reject everything.
He was a Jesuit, right?
Yeah, I reject a whole lot of stuff that he said. I'm just saying, hey, he got at least 2 things right. And plus he believed in God. So should we become atheists?
So the key issue regarding libertarian freedom is in regards to this issue of the salvation of man, is it not? So how can we separate it out?
No. Look, we should do another discussion.
You brought up Ephesians 1. What's Ephesians 1 about?
That God predestines all things.
But the beginning of it is in Christ, adoption, salvation, forgiveness of sin, right?
Yes, I am saying that. And look, I affirm predestination of. Do you affirm double predestination? Oh yeah, because I do. I affirm predestination of all things. Name one thing that I don't think is predestined.
Okay. This was the time that I said we would gather questions, and I hope you all put your second.
Did you want to say anything to that? I mean, it's just, I had a hard time following where, I think if I were White, again, I think at this case, you should just present your argument maybe, and then ask a question. Look, so this is what I think, right? I think this because of X. Now, here's a question for you.
Yeah, I wish I would have said, look, my primary biblical case for libertarian freedom was regarding Christians who are already saved. Therefore, it's got nothing to do with soteriology. The question is, should we apply it to soteriology? But that's not the topic.
Now,
of
the
tonight's
the
debate.
thing is that he's insistent, right? So there is a move here that you can pull, but it's annoying to do, but like you can ask for an argument. Look, you're claiming that this is assertive. You're claiming that soteriology is involved in my central point, XYZ, whatever that is. Give me an argument for why it's involved. And then that makes him argue, and then you can just look for something fallacious or some false premise.
Oh, wow. That's good.
That's one way to do it. But that's only if he's insistent, right? Yeah. If you say, I think that you did well, you granted all this stuff, but he kept on going with it, right? So then at that point, I think the aggression needs to come out. You need to say, what's the argument for why soteriology matters to this dichotomy that I'm presenting? Right? And to my argument, like what, you got to give me an argument now, right? I don't see any reason to believe that. And then that pushes it on him. He's likely not able to give an argument. And then that puts the momentum in your favor.
Nice.
That's one way it could go, but
great
that's
advice.
Consistent.
Grade, writing skills to good use. So if my volunteers could gather questions.
So fast forward through this part.
Yeah, we don't teach. Only the homeschool kids still learn handwriting.
Yes, you're homeschool, right?
Yeah.
You say fast forward through this part, or did I hear the video?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a
okay,
little break in the action here.
Okay, so I see. Okay. We'll start here.
Others who are going through the same thing. How can you stand at a graveside and not recognize the importance of this?
So God causally determines sin and evil. This brings us to the problem of evil.
That.
Beliefs by prior antecedent.
Okay, that's enough. Remember, we won't get to them all anyway.
I'm sorry. The thing is that the bar is it's such a long, it's a 2-hour, 19-hour presentation. So this is one
outside force.
Okay, there we go. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties.
You're all right.
Indeed, puppets are the kinds of things that are causally determined by prior antecedent conditions, forces. So with that in mind, let's reformulate your argument in the following manner. One.
Excuse me, can I object your definition?
No.
Yes.
One.
A puppet is.
Oh, I think you should have let him object to, because you said this is what I mean by puppet, that it's causally determined. And if he objects to that, what he's saying there is that's not what I mean by puppet. That's something that I think you should be sensitive to, right? Because you can't really be wrong. Think about this. This is kind of a little bit, I hope I don't get too philosophical, but you can't be wrong about what you mean by a term. You can be wrong about how other people use it, right? Like about the consensus of what people mean. But if you say, this is what I mean by puppet, and they say, that's not what I mean by puppet, they can't be wrong about that. I think, and this is my principle, right? If someone means, unless they're being dishonest and they're trying to trick you with saying something stupid, which usually is not the case, right? I just use their terms. Okay, so what do you mean by puppet, Dr. White? This is what I mean by puppet. And then they give a definition, and sometimes you might find a counterexample to what they mean, and then you can go on from there. But I think you should have given him the courtesy of telling him what he means by puppet.
Yeah.
Is not a person. A puppet is not a creature of God.
Right.
It is an inanimate object, and therefore to even make the application is one of the reasons why all puppet analogy is completely wrong.
Try to ask.
Now, if you had let him done this, then you would have actually caught him here. And let me show you how you would have caught him here. He did not give a definition of a puppet. He gave examples of what are not puppets, right? You gave a definition of a puppet, like that which is causally determined. Is some kind of necessary or maybe even sufficient condition for being a puppet. You tried to give a definition. I might have caught the beginning, right? Yeah. Then he says, no, I don't accept that definition. And then you ask him, what do you mean by puppet? And he says, well, not a dog, not a person, not a this. That's not, he's not giving you what he means by it. Yeah. Right. And then eventually he's going to find himself saying something like what you said. Right.
Right.
So I think that's what I would have done here. Usually when people object to if you're really airtight with your terms, like if it really tracks what most people mean and they disagree with you, usually you can catch them in some kind of counterexample. Okay. So that's what I would have done here. And I didn't see this earlier when I reviewed it, but.
Well, he's pretty soon he's going to make a couple comments. One about regarding the puppets and rebellion of man, and another, and then he goes on. I want to make a statement about that, and then he says something about if God creates time, you're not a puppet. But let's keep an eye out for those two things.
All right.
Okay. If God causally determines your nature, your desires, your wants, your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions. How does that not make you a puppet? Just being aware, consciously aware of what's going on doesn't make you any more. You're just a glorified puppet.
I'm very, very glad that we finally got to this, because this is the central rebellion of man. You cannot have a God who fulfills Psalm 135:6 or Ephesians 1 without coming up with this idea that, well, if God creates time and makes you as a part of time, that turns you into a puppet. That's the whole point of the.
Nothing to do with
Excuse
time.
me, I'm going to finish my answer.
Go ahead.
That's the whole point of my pointing to Jesus. The Word became flesh. He entered in and lived amongst us. That means that what God created in time is central and vital and important to his own self-glorification.
What do I disagree with there?
And
yeah, that was good for you to say. What do I disagree there? He is, and this is, I don't really think this is a lot of curveballs here. Okay. I think, and this is in hindsight, I don't even know if I would do this, but if I'm looking, what I would hope I would have done is like, okay, this is what I mean by puppet. What do you mean by puppet? And then, or how is it that, how do you differentiate? Or you could do your robot stuff, right? Like, look, I program a robot to fish, right? God creates a nature such that I fish. What's the distinction if I causally determine the robot and God causally determines me? What's the distinction between the robot, Dr. White?
Yeah.
Right. And I think you did ask something like that, right? And then he's just going, I think he's going in all weird directions here with time, and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I felt like I gave a good argument and asked a good question. And then he says, well, this gets us into the rebellion of man. And, I have to ask, well, did God causally determine the rebellion of man?
And let me say something. If a lot of, I'm going to do some kind of speculation here about certain stuff that's happening psychologically here. And from a perspective of a non-believer, right? First of all, if a non-believer was listening to the second that we hear, oh, well, this is the rebellion, we're just like, whoa, where is this coming from, right? But to a Christian audience, right, it's not like crazy to hear that, right? And so this is, your kind of response, or your kind of like thinking as a state of a man's rebellion. They're going to be like, yeah, men are in rebellion, right? But I'm telling you, non-believers are probably, or someone that can get past that, yes, it's true that we're in a rebellion. Well, what does that have to do with this? We're going to see this for what it is. This is not a response to what you're saying. So,
yeah, and let me briefly just comment on his time response, that if God creates time, then you're not a puppet. And that's just irrelevant. And just because God created time, it doesn't follow that humans can't possess libertarian freedom. It doesn't follow that God cannot know prior to his creation of time how humans would freely think and act if God were to create humanity in time. In fact, I discussed this. I discussed God's relationship to time and what he knows in this timeless kalam state, as it were, and the freedom of humanity to act in time in the final chapter of my book. So bottom line, White's response is irrelevant here, and it fails to address my question, and it just added to my frustration.
Yeah, and I think it justifiably did. Let's move on.
Remove that, to reduce that, as you just did, to some concept of being a puppet is absolutely absurd, Tim. I do not even understand how you can do so.
Well, because look, the antecedent. Let me ask you another question. If antecedent conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. That's true by the law of the excluded middle. Okay. So did God create the antecedent? I'm asking a question. Did God create the antecedent conditions to causally determine the Christian man to sin?
It's a good question, but I think you could have stuck with the puppet thing. I think you could have said, like what I said earlier about the robot example, but it's still on track. You're still track, but now you've got the audience is going to feel like they've moved on when you're really asking the same kind of question, right? Yeah. But I think, maybe this would have been the right move if you couldn't get him to say what a puppet is, or if he would just not budge on the term puppet. Then yeah, moving on is a good move. But I think you could have stuck with it. But yeah, it's tough. This is a tough situation to be in, given his sort of response. It's actually this kind of response just makes you squint. It's like, okay, I'm not really understanding, right? And but anyways, we'll move on. If you had unless you had anything to say.
Yeah, just look at what Dr. Clay Jones says here. One of my former profs. He says that your earlier suggestion was good. Doesn't like the cross sex. So
Okay.
yeah, thanks, Dr.
Agree.
Jones.
Thank you.
Created all things, and therefore, good Lord, I hope he did, because he has used my sin in my life, not only to my sanctification, making me more like Christ, but also in my helping others who are going through the same thing. How can you stand at a graveside and not recognize the importance of this?
So
Now, what's funny, well, I hope you say this, Molinist affirmed that, right? That God, there's a sense in which God, there's where in the case of Joseph, right, God used Joseph's misfortunes to bring him to the seat of power in Egypt, right? There's a sense in which God uses evil for good, right? It's just not going to be in the causal deterministic sense. This is what I think you should say here. Maybe not. I think maybe you're, but this is what I might say, I should say.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it.
So God causally determines sin and evil. This brings us to the problem of evil. Let me ask you another question.
Was not, okay, you just made a statement that's actually a question. Acts chapter 4 says he did. What does Acts chapter 4
God
say?
causally determines every single thought of every
You just
evil
said
thought
God-
and
you
action.
just said
God
God
causally determines
determines
every
sin.
sinful evil thought and action.
God,
The Bible
you just
does not
said-
say that.
You just said God determines sin.
God,
And
no, I
in
said,
Acts
does God
chapter 4,
determine every single?
Did you ever say that God determines sin?
I don't.
He just
recall
said,
it.
he just
I mean,
tried to quote you that,
I mean, if I said it, I think I was saying, according to your view, God causally determines.
I don't
sin.
think you ever said that, but
Yeah.
anyways.
If I, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Every
ahead.
single evil thought. Show me in scripture where that says that. Question. If humans never possess libertarian freedom, then that means the antecedent conditions are sufficient to cause and determine all things about humanity, and Ed would be true. However, if antecedent conditions are insufficient to causally determine all effects of humanity, then Ed is false. So based upon the law of the excluded middle and non-contradiction, either my view or your view is true. Multiple choice questions for you. Question.
Okay, whoa, please.
Is it the case?
Okay, I'm not
of
going
the
to
first
answer
sin-
questions based upon false definitions. Okay, it's a waste of our time.
I don't know. By the way, I think what people mean by false definitions is just that I'm not going to use the terms the way that I don't use the terms the way you do. So, you know, I'm not by your, but it's one, it goes back to what I previously said, right? He's just, well, by false definitions, I think what he means is that you're using the terms differently than I. So I want to clear up the terms, right?
Okay.
But anyways, I think that's all that's what's meant, but it is a weird phrase. False definition is not something that any philosopher or uses really. They just use, you know, they talk about what I just talked about. Did you want to say anything?
I think, you know, sometimes folks on the other side complain that I don't define things exactly as they do or as they'd like me to. Oftentimes that's because I don't think their definitions are that clear. And I think, you know, when I say, look, antecedent conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. You know, I'm trying to bring it down, make it as clear as possible as to what we're discussing. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's all tricky stuff because then I don't know if you've ever been accused of plain semantics or right. Which is why because false definitions, he's getting ready to say this is just semantics or philosophy, right? That's where some people go with, but that's why my goal in these debates is try to use their terms or just show why their terms are impractical, you know. But I'm not saying that's the right way to go. That's just a strategy that I employ. Use your terms. Oh, if you're using the terms this way, there's going to lead to some contradiction or incoherency, but we'll try to move on.
All right.
Fine.
Is
I'm
it-
not going to do it.
What false definition?
Yes,
In
you
the
keep
case,
using
let me
liberty-
ask you my time to ask you a question. In the case of the first sin, were the prior conditions A, sufficient, or B, insufficient to causally necessitate the first sin? You've already said they're insufficient and called it creaturely freedom, but would you just reiterate that for us?
Okay, I'm gonna answer the 3-minute sermon you just gave, if you don't mind, and maybe take even half that time in responding to it. I have pointed out more than once that your definition of libertarian freedom is
It's
primarily
creaturely freedom.
your definition that you have used, the term libertarian freedom, which you've used in your presentation and which you used in your question, assumes things that I've already said I do not believe. You know the difference between categorical freedom and
And
conditional
I
freedom.
explained why it doesn't work in my
Well,
rebuttal.
well, no,
playing
no,
the bass on an airplane.
you didn't. Okay,
Yes,
so,
I did. I've written about it too.
Simply making up a story
It's in
is
here.
not a meaningful rebuttal. The Bible tells us that we are judged on the basis of doing according to our nature and our desires.
That God
and
caused
your
you to-
bass playing on a plane does not undo what the scriptures teach.
Okay, next question. Did God, A, cause and determine the regenerate Christian man who sadly fell into temptation? You said we all still do that. So did God, A, cause and determine the regenerate Christian man who sadly fell into temptation and raped the little child, to rape the little child? Or B, could this regenerate Christian man have taken his thoughts captive to obey Christ and taken the way of escape God promises to provide so that he did not have to rape the little child? Yes or no, or A or B?
Good question.
To even ask yes or no with a loaded question like that is simply absurd, in my opinion. I'm sorry.
So let's be very clear on this question, right? The question is, did God causally determine a rapist to rape? By causally determine, you're talking about a necessity, right? Necessitation, meaning that it could have not been otherwise.
Right.
If God causally determines his rapist, he could have not raped.
And it was a regenerated Calvinist, by the way, who did the rape.
And so this is, this is a good question. This is not, I don't see, so what a loaded question is that he's accusing you of a hidden assumption, right? In a statement or in the question, right? And the second that someone accuses me of a loaded question, like what's the hidden premise that you reject? That should be your question. What's the hidden premise that you reject? And then I think he would have really struggled there. He would have probably asked you to repeat the question, and he would have not been able to show. And then you can, if you really want to get dirty, you can ask him, okay, so it wasn't a loaded question. Okay. So, but that sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah, I really dropped the ball there.
I
like you too.
But these questions that you've decided to write up and load in such a way, I hope everyone is listening to this.
Well, it's a yes or no question.
No, it is not a yes or no question.
Why
is
is it?
absolutely.
You see, if you had just said, what's the hidden premise? What's the hidden assumption that you reject? That would have thrown him off.
Absurd to talk about regenerate man, to not talk about what God's purposes in that person's life would be, to not talk about the interaction with that child, the parents, anything else. God is glorifying himself in everything that happens. You and I are judged on the basis of what we knew at the time. But
I want everyone to look at Dr. Stratton's face right now, right? And this is, let me tell you, I would be looking very similar. I don't know what this has to do with the question, right? The causal history of the child, of the rapist, just all you need to know is that God is determining it. That's all the causal history relevant to the question.
Do otherwise?
I'm sorry?
But we couldn't do otherwise? We're based on what we know, what God caused us to know, and caused us to act, and caused the man to rape a little child?
You keep asserting that we have to have knowledge of God's decree. That's the otherwise. We don't.
I don't know where that's coming from either.
No.
Yeah. So these, I mean, it's sort of like, because if you didn't, how do I phrase this without being too harsh on Dr. White? If you had an interlocutor that at least seemed like he was giving the sort of typical responses to what you're saying, then the conversation flows. But these are like curveball responses, right? It's like, I don't know what's being discussed anymore, right? But that's my opinion. So
we only have God's prescriptive will to go by. And so yes, the man can do otherwise if he desires to do so. The question is, has God decreed what would take place? And in your own system, you say that God decreed that.
So if the man could have done otherwise, if God would have causally determined him to do otherwise, that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying that.
No, because I could have played the bass guitar if God would have given me a bass guitar, but he didn't. So it doesn't.
Yeah. Again, this goes back to my previous criticisms. I think you just need to get clarity from him. And I think it's sort of like, how I look at clarity questions is like, he's got a bunch of, like, he's never taken, like I had my violin teacher use this example when I was like fabricating notes on the violin, but she gave me this analogy where like you don't take showers, right? And all you do is spray cologne, right? And once you wipe off the cologne, right, you just stink, right? So what's happening is that's what clarity questions do. They show either the lack of understanding or the baselessness of what's being said, right? And I think that the problem is that you're responding to things that are probably not even intelligible to you at this moment. Clarity questions will expose what he's either trying to say, and in which case you're making progress, or the kind of baselessness of what he's saying, or the unintelligibility of it. So
that's good.
I
can't force you to hear my rejection of your redefinition.
So the Christian man who rapes the little girl.
Can I? You all seeing this? Okay, you're all seeing it.
Are you saying that he's not answering my question? Okay.
No.
No, they're all agreeing.
That's because you've got all your Molinism.
That's your Calvinist right there.
You see, I don't think this was that bad. I think this was fun.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it looks bad. I think it was cute, but I have an odd sense of humor, right? So I don't think it was that bad.
You don't think I came across wrong?
So
Who put the signs on the pews that say the Molinists sit there and the Calvinists sit there?
No, I think this was fine.
Did they freely choose to sit there?
yes, they did. You were determined. Okay. I like it. Okay. Here's the thing. Let's just bring it down. I think it just hits us all because we know that some Christians have done horrible things like raping little kids. And we're either left with, if Ed is true, that means that God causally determined that to happen. Now, if Molinism is true, God doesn't causally determine these things. He creates a world in which he knows that it will happen, but he also has the end game in mind. And now you said, now you talked about purpose.
Are you saying that you're not asking questions, you're preaching? You do realize
I
that this is
forgot
the
whose time
worst
it was.
cross-examination period I've ever gone through.
It's true. I mean, maybe it's because I've seen it so many times, but it does feel like there's a repetitive nature. But I don't blame you because a lot of his responses you don't feel like you're being responded to. I think is that kind of what's going on?
Oh, definitely. And notice that when I come close to explaining how Dr. White's point fails, he interrupts and won't allow me to finish my train of thought. You know, even if I were breaking the rules of the cross-examination, it seems to me that if White really cared about the truth, that he would have let me finish uninterrupted.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, is this the worst cross-examination period you've ever seen?
Well, in terms of formal debate, probably not. I mean, look, I just think that you're being a little too hard on what happened. You haven't made any serious philosophical mistakes. All the philosophical problems I have are ones that are tangential to the conversation. I really am having a hard time understanding Dr. White here. Okay. And I think your biggest mistake is not seeking clarification now that I'm looking at it over again. And responding to questions or responses that don't seem, but I just don't think it was that bad. I mean, and I've seen the social media. A lot of the social media has violently reacted to this cross-examination. And yeah, it was a little bit, it was entertaining. There was crazy stuff going on, but it just wasn't as, I don't think it was as bad as you're making it out to be. But that's my opinion. Maybe someone has a different standard.
Well, I want to be a perfectionist. So
exactly.
If I see I wasn't perfect, I want to critique it and I want to learn from it. So.
Of course, yeah. Okay.
I did not realize that because I'm having such a good time. This is my first.
But you don't know how to ask questions.
No. Well,
that was a little annoying.
He doesn't know how to answer questions, but
we'll move on. We'll just leave it there.
All right.
you really get me off track though. Also, so anyway, I think I'm done. Am I done?
Shall we blame him?
Yeah,
I mean, he's
it's all
sitting
his
here,
fault.
so why not?
You see, this was good.
The pastor of the church, blame.
This is what makes this cross-examination not a tier below. Y'all are both being cordial with each other and had these comedic breaks. It's intense, but it's not y'all. It seems like y'all are good sports, at least in these cases. So,
and I'll say this: I was too nervous to even try cracking a joke, but I would realize when he would do it because White was able to do so. I thought that was cool, and I was fine with playing off that. And I have to give him props. He's kind of funny. I actually like him. I do. It sounds weird because I.
You could definitely like someone that right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't dislike White. I might been frustrated with him in debates, right. But
I get blamed for everything. So.
Did you want to read the comment? Yeah.
Yeah, Danny is correct. Philosophically, Tim, you are absolutely on point. You just need to work on rhetoric and strategy, and you'll be a great debater. Thank you, Micah. I've got a lot of work to do, but thank you.
So anyway, how much time? 1 more minute. Okay.
1 more minute. Let's stay on this topic because I'm going to pick it up.
Okay. Do you affirm that God causally determined the child rape?
God decreed it. That does not mean causally determined.
Well, I agree.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so he just said that doesn't mean causally determined. And then he says God decreed it. Holy cow. How is that not Molinism right there? I don't see how you can say God decreed it because that's the Molinist is all about the decree. And then did he just say that's not causal determinism?
Yeah, he just said that, which
Okay.
either means two things: he accidentally conceded the debate, or we really don't understand what he mean. We don't understand him at all. Like,
Right.
you know. So, and either are failures, right? The fact that we're at this point and we just don't know what he believes is a failure on his part.
And it's a huge failure on my part because I don't think I caught that there. And man, if I did, I should have really hit him with that, saying, "How are you not a Molinist here?"
Well, let's see how you respond.
Okay.
Because you
because
keep
the Molinist has access. Sorry, I forgot the rules.
Oh, see,
Okay,
I got shut down.
I don't think you know. Yeah, you didn't notice, but that again is just.
No, I think I did. I noticed
Okay.
something, but I think I was, I said sorry because I think one of them said, "Oh, this is not the time to, or my time to." Like, I felt like I was breaking the rules again.
Yeah, I would, if I were you, I would have not let anything get in my way. Even if the moderator, because there's a lot of flexibility with the moderator, right?
Yeah.
I believe it or not, you're like, I just want 35 seconds to say this, and then
Okay.
that might be a little white lie, so maybe raise it to 30 seconds. But I would have gotten that out because that's the debate right there,
Mhm.
right? That's the debate right there.
Go ahead.
Okay. I reject the term causally determined because it presents the idea of a moral neutral agent being forced to do something against his will. I am not saying that. I am saying that we, as morally meaningful creatures, live in a time that God has created, and we are judged only on the things that we know. So it is not forcing me to do something. You have 60.
Yeah, and I think I do say this in the review. He's conflating. Look, if you're compatibilist, you distinguish between causally determined and the sort of causes that are coercive and the sort of causes that are not, right? So the fact that he said, I reject causal determination because I don't take it to be force, do you want to elaborate on that? Or
Well, again, I just bring it back to what I said in the opening statement. Yeah. Antecedent conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about being forced against one's will. We're talking about even one's will and their nature and their wants and their desires being causally determined by God. But yeah, I mean, if White's going to reject and say that things are not, that God can decree something without creating the antecedent conditions that are sufficient to causally necessitate all effects, including our choices, then that means our choices are free in the libertarian sense. Mm-hmm. Does that seem right to you?
That seems, yeah, I would have at least asked clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they don't mean when something like that happens, they elaborate and you can clarification, but that definitely needs elaboration at most. Yeah.
15 seconds.
Okay. The antecedent conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all effects. That's true or false. If Ed is true, God created the antecedent conditions which causally determine everything, including child rape. Yes or no? Yes or no? Answer it.
Now, I felt horrible about how I ended that because I yelled yes or no, but it's because he's like, next question, next question, next question. He's not letting me finish.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that was the proper body language. What I would have done is just insist at this point and literally wait for the moderator to like get ready to boot me out, because that is such like, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do, but like, look, I just want to answer the question. Are you going to answer? Moderator, 30. I just want him 5 seconds to say yes or no to that, or not answer. You know, and then what is he going to say? No. You know, like then he would have said either yes, no, or you don't know, Dr. White, or you're not going to answer. I would even not. I don't know. I would have yes, no, or you're not going to answer.
Yeah,
and then I'll link my time.
He could have answered. I gave him a yes or no question, and he was just like, "All right, you ran out of time." It's clear that he did not want to answer.
But you were trying to respect the institution of debate, and
I was.
And there's nothing wrong with that, really. But I mean, I will, in cases like this, you got to roll up your sleeves and sometimes ask, wait, just 1 second. I just want a yes or no, and we can move on. Yeah. But that's pretty, I don't know, like a little bit breaching of what you didn't want to infringe on the rules, but so that's understandable. We'll move on.
All right. 10 minutes. I have, as a pastor, been in situations where there have been horrific incidences of sin. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that in the world God created, all those incidents of sin have a redemptive and glorifying purpose in revealing God's character to creation.
Amen to that. Yes, I do. And I think it only makes sense on Molinism.
Okay, so if that is the case, that means in Molinism, God chose to put each of the perpetrators of whatever horrific sin you want to postulate in the position of doing what they did, and he did so purposefully.
That's kind of it. So in my written work, I've distinguished between
So I will say that as someone that doesn't accept either view, I relate to Dr. White's question, because I do think this is a question. This is a good question from Dr. White, and it should be taken very seriously. And I think you do try to take it seriously as you can.
a manipulative view of Molinism and the strange view of Molinism. And I think everybody can see this. How many of you have seen the Avengers movies? Raise your hands.
Oh my.
Yeah, here we go. All right, because Jesus loved to help people understand reality by using fictional characters, so I'm going to do the same thing. Hydra.
You see, that was good. Saying that God operate on parables. I'm going to do something similar. Get over it. You know, that's good.
Causally determined and mind-controlled Bucky to commit evil acts. And Tony Stark was wrong, and everybody knew it, to try to kill Bucky when Hydra was the one mind-controlling and causally determining his thoughts, which led to his evil actions.
Okay.
Everybody realized that he was evil.
Dr. Stratton,
Let me add one more important
Stratton.
point. Please, one more important point to answer this question.
You're not answering the question.
Oh, I
That's
am,
right.
because it's going to be clear. Everybody knew that Hydra was to be blamed and not Bucky. However,
Stratton.
when Doctor Strange actualized a circumstance where Thanos would freely choose to do evil, everybody knew, even though Doctor Strange had the end game in mind, knowing that Thanos' evil would be defeated and all the saints would be raised, everybody praised Doctor Strange for being the hero. Yes. Okay, sorry.
Okay, so here's my opinion on Avengers Marvel stuff. This is my opinion. I know Dr. Stratton might disagree with me, but here's the thing with this type of analogy, or using Marvel specifically. Half the audience will be like, yes, right? Like, and then the ones like me, right, who are sick and tired of Marvel. The fact Hydra and Bucky, I didn't know what these things were, right? I'm just like, I'm sick of every year they pump out movies. They're just trying to get my money at this point.
Right.
That crowd has tuned you out, including Dr. White, right?
Mhm.
So, I think there might be, I think simpler examples. I think, for instance, sorry, not simpler examples, but you can use the cases you were using earlier about having false theology and all that stuff. Like, I would prefer to do that rather than invest a lot of time in this particular understanding of middle knowledge. I don't think you're wrong here. I think this is fine. I think it's a little disrespectful that he's not trying to understand you, though. But that, I know that's frustrating, but I'm telling you, as far as remember, who's your number one priority is the audience. You've got maybe 50% of the audience being like, yes, I love Avengers. Oh, I get it. Oh, yeah, I remember that scene with Doctor Strange doing the whole like meditation thing. Yes, I see. And then you have the others that they hear Bucky and they're done. Right. What's the name of Bucky? Like, but
let me ask you this. I mean, so I think the best illustration given to make the point that Molinism is just as bad as Calvinism or as exhaustive divine determinism is something offered by Dr. Greg Welty. And he wrote a paper discussing Bullet Bill, who is not a well-known video game character, to make his point. I think he's in Mario Brothers or something. And everybody's like, oh, I mean, even people that have never played, I'm sure Dr. Craig has never played Mario Brothers. He's like, well, let's take this seriously. Let me hear about this Bullet Bill illustration. This objection that you're making against Molinism. You know, everybody is being charitable enough to try to understand this Bullet Bill, this fictional character in a video game that hardly anybody knows of, to make Greg Welty's point. Now, I thought, wow, the Avengers, especially Endgame or Infinity War and Endgame, I believe Endgame was the most viewed or most profitable movie ever, or at least if it's not ever, it's right up there.
Top 3, I think, at least.
So I knew that, I mean, the vast majority of average people of the audience would have seen these movies. And so in that sense, I felt like, gosh, can you get a better one? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think I might just be in a minority category. It's hard to think of an example of how this seems to me, but going back to your original question, are there better illustrations of how middle knowledge can be on display, right, without infringing on freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you that I think the Doctor Strange case is a very good example, right?
You think it's good?
Yeah. So I think as far as the causally determined stuff, I think then this is not me. This is not me giving advice or saying anyone made a mistake or did well. I'm just saying this is what I would do. I would probably just use the Marvel stuff to express the Doctor Strange scene, because that is a pretty philosophically profound scene, I think, right? Gets you thinking. All the causal determination stuff, I would leave to having false theological beliefs, sin. Okay. So I think did you use it in the example of Bucky and the Hydra and all that stuff? I think that you could have brought your having false theological beliefs, and then just reserve the Doctor Strange scene for the middle knowledge stuff. But that's what I'm not. I don't even know if you should do that. That's what I would do, because it gets repetitive to hear Marvel for me.
Right. Yeah, and I have to say one thing. I mean, to the many White disciples, Dr. White disciples that were there and commenting online, I felt like it was a little unfair. I mean, I saw one Calvinist popularizer writing in the thread saying, "Oh, Avengers 3:16," and that was all. Like, oh, like that's supposed to invalidate my entire case. I felt like, yeah, I mean, if people are willing to give Greg Welty the chance to explain through a video game character that nobody knows about, I guess I would like the same courtesy in return here.
Yeah, well, the thing is that like when I write papers, I know that my professor or whoever's likely to read the paper is looking for what I mean and what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. But when you're in the public arena, this is a coliseum, right?
Yeah,
they're going to look for anything they can make fun of you if they are, like, I mean, even this happens to Christians and non-Christians, right? Mr. White, Dr. White is my hero, and then here you are as an opponent. Oh, I can make jokes about Marvel, but you might be okay with those jokes. I don't know. I wouldn't be okay. I would not make myself vulnerable to those kind of that ridicule. But that you might be like, look, no, I'm sticking by it. It's a good example. Why don't you show me why it's false, right? Or why it's disanalogous? And you might be that type of person. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, for my psychology, I don't want to be. Those sort of comments would bother me. So I would just use. Yeah.
Let me unpack this briefly in a way that I wish I could have expressed it during the debate, and then I want you to tell me what you think of it when I get done here. So, I think this is, let's call it Stratton's infamous Avengers analogy here, but this is why I think it's key. So I think it's fair to say that everyone's intuition is that Doctor Strange is a hero who saved the Marvel Comics universe, and he should be praised, right? So Strange actualized all the evil that happened in Endgame, right? So Strange, we could say, and this is going against Greg Welty's bullet bill illustration, by the way. So Strange actualized all the evil that happened in Avengers Endgame. So we can say that Strange is responsible for that evil, all the evil of Thanos and every bad thing that happened. Strange, in a sense, is responsible for it. He made it happen. But Doctor Strange did so because it was the best feasible or possible future. And I didn't hear anyone saying that Strange, after that movie came out, that Strange is just as bad as Hydra after watching Avengers Endgame. So this is why I refer to this, I think it's pronounced tu quoque, objection against Molinism, and what I now call is the bullet bill fallacy, because it focuses on predestination while ignoring the difference between Hydra predestining evil via causally determined mind control and Doctor Strange predestining the evil that occurred in the world via actualizing a world in which he does not causally determine the thoughts of Thanos or his actions, but allows him to act freely with Strange's middle knowledge of the end game in mind. And so I think this is how it's important. And I don't discuss Marvel or Avengers or anything in an upcoming co-authored journal article that I've got coming out, I believe, in May. But I say this, for all we know, the actual world is the best feasible, freedom-permitting world, even with its moral, natural, and gratuitous evils, as well as its divine hiddenness. For example, it's possible that the actual world is the one feasible, freedom-permitting circumstance where evil is ultimately defeated and all who are not transworld damned, that's bracketed, are saved. And I say the bracketed words leave room for hopeful universalism. And in this specific feasible maximal harvest world, or if this specific feasible maximal harvest world exists, then a perfectly wise and loving God would create it no matter how much finite suffering, evil, or divine hiddenness existed, or refrain from creation altogether, end quote. So to be clear, I'm not a universalist. However, I think Molinism provides the best framework for being a hopeful universalist. And after all, shouldn't we all hope for universalism to be true? And I think Kirk McGregor is going to be discussing this in his forthcoming book. But now the Ed advocate doesn't need all of this learning from light momentary afflictions, preparing us for eternity in heaven, as Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 4:17 and alludes to in James 1, 2, and 3. All right, this only makes sense, it seems to me, if humans are free in a libertarian sense. And this is because, as I noted in the cross-examination, God could causally determine heaven from the beginning, and he certainly does not need to causally determine the Calvinist to cheat on his wife or rape the little child. Now, White might respond, and does respond, I think, by saying, but this is all to God's glory for the benefit of the one growing in Christ. Well, what if the little girl the Calvinist raped was non-elect and grew up to be an atheist because a Calvinist raped her? I mean, that just seems absurd to me, and I think it will seem absurd to most people. But here's the bottom line. And to bring it back to the intuitively obvious difference between Hydra and Doctor Strange, I think White saw the relevant difference during the debate. And this left him with only one response, to say, but Dr. Stratton, Thanos isn't in the Bible, and to hold up his Bible and let the crowd go crazy. Well, I never said Thanos was in the Bible. I never implied Thanos was in the Bible. I was trying to illustrate my point, just like Greg Welty does with fictional characters, just like Jesus did in the Bible, and yet I'm condemned for it. So what do you think?
First of all, I think that all of what you said is understandable and clear to me, and I think that White did nothing to undermine it. Okay, but my criticism is the same kind of criticism that I would give myself when I'm not a naturalist. Okay, so I think the mind is separate from the brain.
Cool.
Okay, sometimes I give examples to naturalists about fictional scenarios. I usually give two examples. Number one, I give Pinocchio as an example. Pinocchio has no brain, right? And so the idea is that we nonetheless are rational for attributing intentionality to Pinocchio and experiences. Also, I give examples of Princess and the Frog, right? That you can exit your body, enter a different body, radically different than your own, and it's still coherent. I think this is excellent. Philosophers are like, whoa, this is something to engage with. But you know what I usually get? I usually get, that's fantasy. This is not Disney. So it's actually very powerful rhetorically to respond to me that way, right? So sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, you don't go that route in anticipation. If you know that it's going to be rhetorically powerful to say, this is not Disney, right?
No.
Look for a second option. But if you know that the person you're talking to is going to be receptive, right? Then go the Disney or the Marvel or whatever, right? So that's what I'm trying to say. I think that, like in my case, I think the Pinocchio example shows that you can have intentionality without brains, and it's not irrational. You weren't irrational for thinking that Pinocchio experienced pain and such, right? Nonetheless, if I'm talking to someone that's not very philosophically inclined, it's actually it's gonna come off flat.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is Dr. White just yesterday was using Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars to make some points. And I just retweeted it. I didn't say anything, just retweeted it. I wanted people to see. I almost said, I mean, if I was dirty, I would have said, but Emperor Palpatine's not in the Bible. You know,
that would have been good. But I'm just a reprobate, so I don't know what you should do. Like, but so look, it's been 2 hours. I'm fine with going over. I'm fine with stopping here. What do you want to do?
Well, yeah, let's finish this thing out.
Okay, cool.
I won't interrupt very much anymore.
All right. Hopefully, I won't either.
Oh, all right. Can we get? Okay, cool. All right. Back to the point. Did God, according to your position, this is the question I just asked, and I would like to have a direct answer to it. Did he purposefully and knowingly place the perpetrators and the victims in the position? Since you've said God decrees everything, exhaustive providence. Did he, knowing what the outcome would be, place those people in the situation that resulted in those grave sins? Yes or no?
God created a world in which he knew what evils would be committed freely.
And so he knew that by...
Yeah. So I do write about this on my website. I don't think God necessarily has to place everybody in these positions literally like that. He can. He's omnipotent, so he can do that. But again, sorry, I'm going to take it back to Dr. Strange. Did Dr. Strange put everybody in the exact positions he wanted them in and then let them act freely? No, he just simply knew that if he gave Thanos the time stone, he knew everything that would occur if he did that, if he were to do that. And so he gave it to him. And so you, in a sense, you can say, even when Star-Lord took 2 vicious knees below the belt, he predestined that to occur. Let's just say that Dr. Strange knew that would happen if he were to give Thanos the time stone. So he didn't place them in that position and say, now make sure you knee him below the belt, Gamora. No, he just knew everything that would happen, created that world anyway. And so in that sense, predestined everything that happened. So we don't have to go to this manipulative view of Molinism. And I think some people try to do that to dismiss Molinism and say it's just as bad. First of all, if it were the case that God did that, it wouldn't be just as bad because there would be a break in the causal chain. But secondly, I don't hold this manipulative view of Molinism that I think Dr. White's attacking. Okay, I just wanted to say that.
And that's important. I will say that if I were in Dr. White's position, these are some of the questions I would be asking you, right? So he's asking the right questions. Right. Let me explain why. Because your whole argument is that God cannot be the author of sin in a causally deterministic sense. And after all, right, like God, what happens to your responsibility if you causally determine all this stuff, right? What he's going to try to do is show, okay, fine, he doesn't causally determine, but it seems like it's no better on your view, right? Because God sets up the world. You don't want to call it causally determined. That's fine. You want to use the word set up or weakly actualized, whatever you want to use. Yet, so he's still, in a sense, an author of evil. And then that's where you come in and bring in this notion of feasibility. And then the Dr. Strange example that, for all we know, this is the world in which God's goals are best achieved. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so I think so he's not off here. I don't think this is an off-topic question.
Right? I agree. I think this is probably his best question of the night.
Yeah, I agree too.
Putting that person in that position, what the outcome would be. He wasn't surprised.
Just like Dr. Strange did with Thanos.
He wasn't surprised.
That's
okay.
Right.
So was that so as to reveal something about God? Was it a redemptive revelation about God? Or is it just the best that he could do given middle knowledge?
It would be, I think this world that was created is the best feasible world given libertarian freedom, not middle knowledge. So this isn't a middle knowledge issue. I mean, it is, it's related, but if God is going to create free creatures that he does not causally determine, then that means he cannot causally determine them if he chooses to do so, if he's powerful enough to do so. So if God creates a world, if it's important to him to create libertarian free creatures, then...
And I want to remind the audience, the speed is at 1.25. Dr. White is not talking this fast. So in case that's a criticism out there. But it is a lot what you're saying here. But it's not. I just to remind the audience, if you're watching, this is sped up, okay? Because if you were talking this fast, that would be a mistake,
Right.
But you're not. So,
And he lets them act freely. But he also knows how they will freely choose before he creates the world, and so he can predestine a libertarian free choice.
You told atheists that my understanding makes God accountable for these horrible, evil events.
Well, God's
yet-
not accountable to anybody.
And you just said
I think what he meant there is responsible. I think that's what he meant.
Yeah.
that God decreed to put all of those people, the victims and perpetrators, into a situation when he has infallible knowledge, his middle knowledge. Is his middle knowledge infallible?
God is infallible.
Okay.
He's omniscient.
He has middle knowledge of what's going to happen. How is your theodicy superior to mine?
Because on your view, God could causally determine heaven from the beginning. There doesn't have to be any single instance of sin or evil ever if God causally determines everything. However,
So what does that have to do with the
because
issue
my
you
theodicy
brought
is
up?
superior. Because
How?
Because on your view, God could have heaven from the beginning. On my view, God creates libertarian free creatures with the end game in mind, knowing that evil will be defeated, the saints will be raised, God will be
Amen.
glorified,
Yep.
and
All to
humans will
God's
be.
glory.
Yeah, this is good. Although it's so, I want to reiterate. I think what you're saying to make sure I've understood your view, Dr. Stratton. The idea is that if God is deterministically causing everything, right? He has this strict sense of control that there would be no fall, right? God could just causally determine everyone to do the good, for instance, or to behave in certain ways. Some people would argue that if you're being causally determined, you're not even an agent anymore. You're a puppet.
I agree.
Yeah. So, but what you're saying is that no, we're agents and we have freedom. So, in virtue of being of the nature of being a person or an agent, right? There's going to be certain things that follow from that. In that, there's certainly the level of feasibility, or certain worlds are no longer going to be feasible for God to set up, right? Yep. And so that's the argument, right? So if Dr. White has followed you here, he needs to talk about that notion of feasibility and how libertarian, the notion that the very notion of libertarianism, why is it the notion of libertarianism would make it such that certain worlds are infeasible? That's where the discussion should go. But let's see where it goes.
Rationally responsible, morally responsible, and true love can exist. But this is beyond the scope of what I have talked about in my opening speech today.
But it's not beyond the scope of what Molinism is, so simply trying to
No,
dodge
it is.
doesn't
It's
mean
beyond the
anything.
scope of mere Molinism.
Okay, so you brought up the question of evil acts to me, and when I then zero in on how your theodicy puts God in the exact same position, you dismiss it and say, I'm not
the
going to
exact
answer.
same position, Dr. White.
Because
it is far from it.
All you said in your response just now, wait a minute, you went on and on and on, was,
Okay,
well, there was libertarian free will someplace. There is no libertarian free will involved when God says, I'm going to put the perpetrator there and the victim there.
Well, that's still free. On my view, that's still free in a libertarian sense.
But God knows what the result's going to be.
Knowledge.
That is a philosophical blunder right there, right? That if God knows it, then it's necessarily true. There's actually a fancy name for that fallacy. It's called the modal scope fallacy.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know the name.
Yeah. The modal scope fallacy, it goes like this. Necessarily, if God knows X, X will happen.
Yeah.
God knows X. And then the mistake is to put necessity in the conclusion.
Right. So I do share that syllogism or that mistake in my book. I don't think I used that term though. So
yeah. I'm wondering. I don't think it has any other name. It might have one other name, but the most common name is modal scope. So that's a modal scope fallacy. But let's see. Maybe we cut him off too early. Hopefully we didn't.
Doesn't stand in causal relation. Let me say that again. Causal knowledge does not.
Okay, use the word decreed. So, but again, it's like he needs to be clear.
Stand in causal relation. There is a break. Look, antecedent conditions, prior conditions are either sufficient or insufficient to causally necessitate all the effects of the human.
So God decrees to put people in that position, but because it's not causally
there's a break in the causal chain.
So he shifted from knowledge to decree, and then under Calvinism, presumably decree is a causal deterministic sense, right? Mm-hmm. But then earlier he said that it wasn't. So now where are we, right? Mm-hmm. That's the confusion.
And so therefore that man who raped the child
But it
is
was
responsible.
absolutely certain to happen when God decreed.
Certainty is not necessity. And that's a huge philosophical
Oh,
mistake you're
certainty
making.
is, okay.
Yeah.
So, but how does it give you any type of answer to the question of
Yeah, that was good.
theodicy?
The same way that everybody knew that
how
Hydra was evil and that Doctor Strange was a hero. Go watch the movies and it's clear. And now if you
how about
Yeah, this goes back to our other conversation.
Right,
This would be
right,
like if I was arguing against physicalists and I said, go watch Princess and the Frog. You know, people are going to be like, you know, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I just want to say, people don't dismiss the analogy. If you want to be intellectual about this, try to understand it. Even if I gave too many Marvel references, fine, but still try to understand it. Just like everybody else on my side of the aisle tried to understand Greg Welty's bullet bill analogy. Give me the same courtesy.
Yeah, I agree.
could I ask a simple question? Could you show me an example of that in here?
I think from the whole.
Now, I will say that the topic of debate is Molinism biblical? Right. So there might be a certain problem here that a lot of this is discussing the coherency of middle knowledge and libertarian free will and problem of evil concerns. So there maybe a lot of the support from the biblical support came in the opening and in the beginning, but a lot of people are going to feel a good rhetorical device here would have been just to go back to scripture, right? Yeah. Say, hey, look, there could be problem of evil here and there, right? But I just want to get back to, do you give me a scripture that contradicts what this says, right?
That would
but there is that concern, but it's hard to disentangle the coherency of Molinism versus EDD, right? And then the biblical support for either of those notions.
Yeah.
Right.
Of scripture, we get that in the guide.
No, give me an example. Whole scripture can always give you examples.
Ezekiel 33, 5 and 11. Right? Let me type it up here. All right, this is Molinism in a nutshell. I'll give you verse 5 and then verse 11. He heard the sound of the trumpet and did not take warning. His blood shall be upon himself. But if he had taken warning, he would have saved his life. God has knowledge of this counterfactual. And now we have verse 11, which implies libertarian freedom. Say to them, as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn back from your evil ways. Why will you die, people of Israel?
What's the context?
So this was good. I think this was good. Now, what's the context? I mean, we'll see what happens.
The context is that they have multiple options, each compatible with their nature.
No, that's not the context.
So then God.
That was good, right? The context is that they're prescribing the principle of alternate possibilities that they could have done otherwise, right? That's what it's saying.
Causally determines those who died to die.
What is the biblical context, sir? Can you step out of your philosopher role long enough to open the Bible?
I'm looking at my.
This is unfortunately very strong on Dr. White's part rhetorically. When you have a room full of Christians and you say, please step away from your philosophy, turn back to the Bible, that's going to resonate.
Yeah.
But I think that what you could have done here is saying, I am in the Bible. I am giving a biblical reason. I'm not giving you a philosophical argument. Right. I'm saying that it's in the text here.
Right.
And I don't know. Yeah. So mistake. Yeah, that's a mistake. Although I really disdain this step away from philosophy, go to the Bible, when I think you and I agree that philosophy is indispensable to making sense of a lot of the biblical ideas. And a lot of Christians are kind of, a little bit hesitant to that view. But the idea is that, you should have just said, I'm in the Bible right now. I have the page open to Ezekiel. I'm telling you right now that it says he could have done differently. He could have turned away, right? This is not philosophy. This is Bible. Right.
But I missed an opportunity.
And what
and
was
God
going
has
on here?
counterfactual
What
knowledge.
started in Ezekiel 18? What continues in Ezekiel 33? The people are saying there is no reason for us to repent because the fathers have eaten the sour grapes and the children's teeth are put on edge. And so we don't have to do any of these things. And what God is saying, I'm warning you. I do not take pleasure in the death of the wicked. Turn from your wicked ways. He uses means. None of this has anything to do with establishing your definition of libertarian freedom.
Remember my opening speech when I said this is like God determining people to be born without arms and then commanding them to shoot a left-handed layup and then holding them responsible for not doing it.
You did not give us an example of
I'm giving you an example.
Thanos isn't in here and there is nothing about Thanos in here.
That is extremely frustrating. I hope people saw that, right?
Well, I
You
think
were
the
right.
crowd cheered.
You were right to go back to your original statements in the beginning of the video. I think I would have simplified as best as I can. Simplicity. Look, libertarian free will could have done otherwise. Causal determinism, no determining to do otherwise.
No.
This verse says they could have turned. So therefore, libertarianism, right? That's all I'm trying to say, Dr. White. That's a Bible. I'm giving you a biblical reason now, not a philosophical one. And drop the mic.
Yep.
Right.
I should have. Oh.
Hmm.
And there's nothing that
But evil
parallels Thanos.
is evil not
Could
found in
you
there?
look?
Is evil not found in there? Gosh, you would get mad at Jesus for telling a parable and using fictional characters to tell us
This was very good. Very good. Yeah. And you cited this earlier.
about reality. That's exactly what I'm doing.
When I'm twisting, if you're twisting scripture, yeah,
What
that would be a
verse have I
problem.
twisted?
How about Isaiah chapter 10? We
What
could
about
go there.
Well,
Oh, I would have, you see, at this point, I probably would have been frustrated enough to force him to show how you twisted it. But
Yeah.
you might have been a nice guy here. I would have not. Right. But that's because I'm getting frustrated right now. So I would have just said, look, no, you just made the claim that I twisted the scripture. Show me how. All I was trying to show is that they could have turned away. Is that twisting scripture? Okay. That,
Well,
I just, and then he, go ahead.
then he said, did he already say that I took Isaiah 10 out of context?
He's but what's infuriating about that is he left the Ezekiel example because I don't think I wouldn't have guessed that he could show you why you were twisting scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But then he references Isaiah 10, and I never touched Isaiah 10. It had nothing to do with my case. I never even talked about it. And he said that I misrepresented it or took it out of context or twisted it. And I believe I say, how did I do that? And he knows I didn't do it. And then he just says, oh, I'm done. Let's watch it.
because I haven't.
Okay. I think we've exhausted everything.
You accuse me of twisting scripture and then don't back it up.
Did you?
The thing is that you're too nice, and you do like him. That doesn't help either. It helps when you don't like him. But I would have just said that's just an unsupported claim. He just baseless accusation. He's not going to support his claim here. I want the audience to take note of that. He accused me. He made the claim that I twisted scripture. He did not support the claim. Take note. Right, something like that. But
Do you have time to actually get through all those questions?
So I think this is it. It's the cross-examination is over here.
okay, it's done. We got through it.
So tell me this. I mean, the reason why I asked you, I feel like you were a little nicer to me today than you were. I mean, you were nice in your video, but you really pointed out some mistakes I made. Do you feel like after watching it again, you're a little less critical of any of the mistakes I made or style, lack of decorum that I may have had or anything?
I don't think I'm less critical of you. I mean, I found the thing is that when you watch it over and over, you start to see more mistakes, but the mistakes that are coming up are the lack of clarity in White's responses. I didn't really, it kind of went over my head a few times, and probably, I don't know if that happened to you while you were debating him, right? But now that you rewatch, you're far more clear than White. And because of that, I have more criticisms of White, where I think I've said in privately and stuff like that I don't think this was as bad as you think for you. I really don't. Right. I've stuck by that. Okay. Before you watch the video and after you watch the video, I've said this is not as bad as you think. Okay. And because I'm seeing, I guess, there might be I think there's just a load of philosophical strengths on your side that are just not being resolved by White. And that's it's frustrating me as I'm going it with you, because I can live vicariously through your. Yeah, no, I don't think I think I'm definitely being more critical of White in this review, but I don't think everything that I pretty much criticized you in the other review, I made the same criticisms here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So Dr. White and his colleague Rich Pierce on Twitter have been saying that that White won this debate because I filibustered the cross-examination. What do you think they mean by that, and do you think that's true?
I don't think it's true. Okay. I think that what has happened is that you didn't know. I think my criticism is that you didn't push them on clarity. And so you were responding to things and they felt like they weren't being responded to. Right. So what would happen is there would be some gibberish happening, whatever. I don't know what they said, or I don't know the relevancy. You would try to respond to it. And then because you didn't understand what was being said, and they might have had a coherent question, they just didn't express it right.
Yeah.
You were just responding to nothing, right? I think that's so. I think that's a little nuanced of an assessment. So I want to be very clear. They expressed something rather than you getting clarification. You tried to respond to it, but it wasn't. You misinterpreted or didn't really understand what they were saying. And then from their point of view, you weren't addressing them. In a sense, you weren't, right? There's an indirect sense in which you weren't. That's because I didn't find some of the stuff that White said either relevant, coherent, or applicable. And yet I found a lot of what you were trying to do is responding to that rather than just asking for clarification. That's my quick assessment. But what do you think?
Oh man, I do, watching it now, especially with you, I'm saying, yeah, a lot of these questions didn't really make sense. And in the thick of it, I mean, there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks out there who have never done a debate. And I knew that this is going to get just tons of views, in the future, that night and on into the future. So unless you experience that, I mean, it's a different kind. I mean, I used to fight in MMA. I had a few MMA fights. It was it really reminded me. I had a lot of the same feelings and emotions getting ready for it. As I got my suit on, put my tie on, that was equivalent to me getting my hands taped up and getting the gloves on, and the adrenaline and the nerves just going crazy. And when you're in the midst of it and you have to think on your feet. I mean, I've debated informally just on Facebook for over the last decade. And that's easy. You can take a look at somebody's comments, you copy and paste it, work your way through it, sit and think about something for a few minutes. Oh yeah, that's a completely different animal. This cross-ex makes you think on your toes, on the fly. And when I was,
White has the advantage there. He's quick to respond.
Yes. Yeah.
But you see, all it takes is a little bit of pushing for clarity.
Right.
And I think that it's just, you're going to get nothing, unsubstantive stuff.
I will definitely remember that for my next debate. I'm looking forward to debating in the future. And Danny, I'll probably be calling on you to spar with me a little bit.
Of course.
And to help me, because you're really, you've got a good eye. You've been trained well in how to debate. And but when I was being asked unclear questions, I guess I felt in the moment like, man, something's wrong with me if I don't understand this question.
No, it wasn't just unclear questions. It was also irrelevant responses to your questions. And that's not easy to respond to, right? If I ask you, what time is it? And you say Thursday morning, or that's not even like, the square root of 9 or something like that, it's going to throw you off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so it was hard to connect your question to what he was saying without just saying, I don't know what you're saying. I don't see how this is the response to my question. Can you clarify?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I mean, after this debate was over, I was so frustrated because I felt like there was so many of my arguments and contentions that were never addressed, questions that were never answered. And I felt like so much went through the cracks. I've already been asked by others to have more debates. And the one thing I've said, I mean, I spent 6 weeks of being laser focused on this and trying to think of everything that White might say in response, everything that some of his coaches who I heard who might be coaching him, what they might say in response, and trying to think of all these what ifs, what if it goes here or what if it goes there. That takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And Dr. Craig, in his recent debate with Eric Wielenberg, for the sake of carefulness and precision, they decided, and I think for time, they decided that Dr. Craig would write his opening statement. Dr. Wielenberg would then get Dr. Craig's statement in advance, read it, and carefully respond to it. Then send that back to Dr. Craig. He could read that, carefully respond to it, and that would go back and forth until they were done. They wrote out the entire debate and then read it. And I think they did have a dialogue in there and a Q&A from the audience, so that part wasn't scripted. But there was so much precision. I enjoyed that debate so much because there weren't, you didn't have to worry about any gotcha moments or zingers. It was careful and precise, and I think everybody that cared about that topic really benefited from it. One individual has asked me to debate on a related topic or very similar to this one. And I said, I'm willing to do that, but I think right now, because so much fell through the cracks here, and for the sake of time, I don't want to have to be wondering, what if he says this, and and it breaks, charting out all these forking paths of what ifs. I just said, let's do this all in advance, and then we'll have a dialogue that's not scripted and a Q&A. What do you think of that, sir?
I think you should do what suits your goals. So some people treat debate like a sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
They enjoy the gotcha moments. They enjoy having the rhetorical front, right? And so they don't prefer those scripted, right? The script stuff, right? Admittingly, I do, although I really do care about truth, I enjoy sparring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for someone like me, I will admit, look, we actually might make more progress intellectually, but I enjoy a back and forth brawl, right?
Right.
But if your goals are different, like for instance, you want to be as informative and as careful with the arguments as possible. You don't want people to you want people to get as much from the discussion as possible, right? You want people to see past the rhetoric in your arguments, right? Then I think that you have a really good reason to have it scripted. Okay. But it just depends on what you want, right? I think White is more on the lines of non-scripted, right? Because he's quick on his feet. He's good at quick responses and such like that. So he doesn't feel the need, right? It depends on what do you see the goal for these sorts of discussions? Are you trying to benefit the viewers? Are you trying to have fun? Are you doing both? Right? I think that's how I would understand.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the reason why I took this debate is and why I wanted it is because of truth. I care about the truth being advanced, and I think his view of God is a low view of God. I think it's a dangerous view of God. I think it's an unbiblical view of God. And what drives me, what gets me out of bed in the morning, and what drives Free Thinking Ministries is really something that A.W. Tozer pointed out, and I referenced him in my closing statement of this debate. Tozer said the most important aspect of a person is what comes to mind when they think about God. And then he goes and he says, the church has advanced unwittingly such a low view of God that's not worthy of thinking, worshiping men, and that is responsible for hundreds of lesser evils. And I think this is what White's view is. It's a low view of God, as A.W. Tozer would say, that is responsible for hundreds of other evils in the world today. And so for me, it's not about, I mean, I've even said to the people in White's camp, they said, hey, you lost because of your style on the cross-examination or whatever. And I said, fine. If Tim Stratton lost, I'll take that L. But Molinism clearly won this debate, and Ed was exposed to be not only unbiblical, but absurd. And so even if Tim Stratton lost, it's not about me. I don't care. I care about the truth. And I'll gladly say Tim Stratton lost, but Molinism won, and go from there. But yeah, my goals aren't to, that's my goal. It's not about me. My goal is to bring glory to God. And that's why.
Yeah, then I would heavily consider scripting it then.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that there are benefits to that. Like Craig is a very good debater,
Yeah.
but when he gets in this, the few debates that he's not done so well, and this is my opinion. I know I'm on a good Christian channel, but I don't think he did very well against Shelley Kagan. I don't think he did as well against Stephen Law, but that's a little bit less obvious. But those cases were very, open-ended, like non-scripted, right? The Eric Wielenberg, yeah, they did script that. That's why if you want to learn about, is Platonism versus something like divine command theory, which one is more plausible meta-ethic? That's a great debate to go to, because you're going to get good, highly thought out written responses to each other, right? Yeah. So I think that based on the little that I know about your goals, right, I think that you might want to consider scripted. And if you want to ever do this kind of like back and forth free stuff, just do it privately. That way you can say, look, you can just sit there and literally pause for as long as you want, right? You're no one cares about rhetoric when it's just you and him, right? And that would be my way of viewing it. Now, I like debate, so I don't mind doing it in any kind of capacity. So,
well, yeah, I'm with you. I liked it too. I mean, it was a rush. I just felt like, wow, for the sake of precision and clarity, there was a lot missed in this that we could have had in this debate that didn't happen. And
no,
so
I kind of agree. Yeah, I think there was a lot missed, but well, I mean, we already went over some of the reasons why that happened, but yeah.
Well, Danny, I just want to tell you, I appreciate you so much. And will you tell people where they can find you on YouTube again?
Yeah, I have a little YouTube channel called Phil Talk. It's a red logo. If you want to learn about talking Filipino, it's not the purple one. It's the red one. It has content on. I have interview philosophers. I have some short little informative videos, and I post my own exchanges. Now, I have to say a lot of them are against other Christians. So if that, just letting you know that, yeah, I am an atheist, but if you don't really care for that, just ignore the debate playlist. Okay. But there's good content for everyone, whether you're a theist or not. I did interview Dr. Stratton, and I have other interviews that we don't talk about philosophy or religion, but thanks for having me.
Well, I was honored, and you're always fair and charitable and willing to have an intellectual conversation. So thank you, Danny, and I look forward to talking to you more in the future. And Godspeed. Bye, everybody.